Chapter 108. The other side of the wall is the quarantine area. There's also an underground fighting arena. Cragburst couldn't see anything other than the white wall. But Luo Nan was different. His soul body had already passed through the wall. He had gone in and out of the building countless times. He was probably more clear about the layout inside than the designer. He combined the information he obtained earlier and explained to Cragburst. Originally, the quarantine area didn't allow for any other arrangements aside from surveillance and defense systems. But the management of the building made modifications in order to ensure the size of the area and the viewing effect. They occupied a portion of the surrounding area. This formed a fuzzy zone. The gangs of the recycling stratum can interact with the gamblers of the upper world. One side pays in money, and the other side pays in manpower. Jack is one of the true controllers of this fuzzy zone. This is his lair and his cornucopia. Cragburst didn't ask for more details. As a man who frequently entered and exited the underground fighting arena, he was even more clear than Luo Nan about the inside of the building. The management of the building should be the house of bankers. Only through this place could one transform incorporeal credit into tangible wealth in the current society of credit and authority. But he didn't care about this at all. He was only interested in how to capture Jack. Jack is in the fighting arena, right? How do we get in? Do we smash a passageway out? Cragburst was a bit eager to give it a try. This is a passageway. It's used for emergency evacuation. The design is that it can only be opened from the inside. Luo Nan let ink flap its wings to wake up this bro whose brain was filled with violence. The problem was that it was completely ineffective. Roar roar. Let's be a bit more direct. Watch me. No. Wait. Wait a few more seconds. Luo Nan's voice had yet to fall when the white wall in front of him slid to one side. The inner layer of steel plates slid in the opposite direction. Only then did the ice-cold metal wall appear. But this wall also split open from the middle, revealing a dimly lit passageway. 3 layers of protection, especially the last layer that was 10 centimeters thick, made Cragburst speechless for a time. He didn't bring up using violence to open a passageway again. As for the passageway in front of them, it wasn't too long. One could see to the end with a glance. The door on the other side was half open. An even more intense light seeped in. There was also clamorous noise coming in. Clearly, the outside was a certain location of the underground fighting arena. Cragburst first looked at his feet. There was a person sitting down in the passageway. The person was already unconscious. He turned his head and looked around. Soon, he found that there was a password plate on top of the man's head. The corresponding screen showed that the password plate had been successfully opened. "You're, mole?" Cragburst quickly corrected this preposterous thought, but the following conjecture was even more preposterous to him. Don't tell me that you controlled this guy through the wall and made him open the door? Bullseye. Speaking of which, the effects of hypnosis combined with the human-faced arachnid's fishing technique were quite decent. Luo Nan just chuckled through the hexaear, maintaining a bit of a sense of mystery. He indicated to Cragburst to close this emergency passageway. This place was certainly connected to the control room. Though they couldn't hide it for too long, they could hide it for as long as they could. What the hell, this isn't just spirit attachment, it's some kind of ability enhancement. Actually, you can let the crow have some of your abilities, right? Do you have wizard blood? Or do you come from some secret order? Cragburst's thoughts were getting more and more outrageous. Luo Nan was really worried that the words, "his soul is in an out-of-body state," would come out of Cragburst's mouth. Luo Nan could only interrupt Cragburst once more. Let's speed things up. It's very likely that Jack is only using this place as a transit point. The isolated area can't enter the business district of Deshang building, but there's a direct passageway to the upper city district. Cragburst immediately shut his mouth. He simply cleaned up the scene and passed through the passageway. There was a circular hallway outside. The curvature was extremely obvious, making people feel that the space was indeed limited. The operator of this place had indeed made use of the space to the extreme. On the concave side of the wall, there was a curved wall projection every now and then. On it, there was an exciting scene in the arena. Sure enough, they're all kids. Cragburst's brows furrowed. He was a professional, so he felt vexed by the various scenes displayed on the screen. They have a certain amount of fighting techniques, but they're all competing in the dark and ruthless. They're trying to kill people. Many of the scenes of being knocked down on the screen had broken hands and feet, or they had been struck in a vital spot. Cragburst wouldn't even blink an eye at these things in the adult fighting world. But the two combatants on the screen didn't look to be older than 15, which was the same age as Luo Nan. They were a group of half-grown kids. They didn't hold back in the slightest. Did they really know what this represented? Many of them knew, judging by the ominous glint in their eyes. And the feeling brought about by this sort of warped thinking made people feel even more uncomfortable. The sound of footsteps came from both sides of the hallway at this time. Cragburst's intentions were to just go up and be done with it. But Luo Nan indicated for Cragburst to go to the other side, to a room with a thick curtain covering the door. Cragburst thought that this was the passageway to the fighting arena, but he discovered that it seemed to be a lounge after entering. The layout was very simple and crude. There were only wardrobes and benches. The passageway to the fighting arena was further inside. There was already a person in the lounge right now. He wore combat shorts, and his upper body was bare. He didn't wear shoes, and a towel was draped over his head. His face was drooping. It seemed that he was conserving his energy. He should be the next competitor to take the stage. He didn't have a coach or a friend by his side. He was all by himself. His entire body was cold and gloomy. He actually didn't react at all to Cragburst, the big guy who had suddenly barged in. Cragburst was a bit stupefied. Then he discovered that the room was actually very noisy. There was a display screen in the lounge as well, but it was a bit smaller than the one outside. The sound from the display screen was quite loud. It made people wonder what use this lounge could serve. The display screen just so happened to jump to a new scene at this time. "Look, Jack." Luo Nan reminded Cragburst to pay attention. The two's minds shook, but they soon discovered that this was just a video clip. Jack was wearing a referee uniform at the time. He wore a bow tie. His body was ramrod straight, and he had a sense of propriety. Aside from the unsightly scars on his face, he looked more like a noble steward than a referee. It was no wonder that his hosting and refereeing were so popular. "This match isn't bad." Cragburst used a professional gaze to evaluate the tall and skinny one. His foundation is very solid. He has a sense of propriety in his attacks. He's a very good control-type competitor. Hold on. There's something wrong with the editing. The editor had chosen this shot to be the scene of the tall and skinny kid slowing down, dodging, and circling around, which Cragburst had praised. It was completely different from the intense fighting scene before. Such camera language should be hinting at something. Luo Nan discovered that the competitor, who had his head lowered all this time, had raised his head to stare at the display screen. His thin and pale face was revealed beneath the towel. He was unexpectedly calm, and he continued to ignore Cragburst to the side. Chapter 109. The focus of the human-faced arachnid's attention was on the quiet and silent competitor. This person's age was about the same as Luo Nan's. His reserved and gloomy nature was about the same. However, the reason for the human-faced arachnid's attention was certainly not because of this. The feedback Luo Nan received was mostly anticipation and hunger. He was like a glutton, staring fixedly at a dish that was gradually cooking on the stove. He felt it was a pity to eat it, but he was impatient to not eat it. "This is the new food you've chosen?" Luo Nan had just been pondering over the changes in the human-faced arachnid's diet. Now he had a true reference. He couldn't help but spend a bit of energy to pay attention, but how could he understand it in a short period of time? And at this moment, the camera turned. The strangely edited match ended, and there was even a post-match scene next. The two competitors stood in the center of the fighting stage, and Jack stood between them. It seemed that it was time to announce the victor. From the previous clips, the lanky kid's advantage was extremely clear, even though he had inexplicably less clips. He displayed an astonishing level of control. However, Jack wasn't in a hurry to announce the victor. He lowered his head to look at his watch. At this moment, the background music of the edited scene strangely stopped. This caused the sharp whistles and whistles from all four sides of the stands to grow louder, more clamorous, and more deafening. Finally, Jack made a move. He spread his arms, but he didn't act like a normal referee, grabbing the competitor's hand. Instead, he wrapped his arms around the shoulders of the two teenagers. It looked extremely intimate. But at this moment, the children's bodies went rigid. Jack wasn't in a hurry to announce the victor. Instead, he spoke like he was reciting a poem. His voice passed through a miniature microphone and spread throughout the entire arena. As the referee, I must judge fairly. This is a conservative fight. The screams from the stands suddenly rose to a whole new level. A fight that has gone beyond time. The screams and cheers grew louder and louder. Some people even stood up and waved their arms towards the fighting stage. This spurred on even more people. Soon, no one was sitting in the entire fighting arena. Jack's expression didn't change as he spat out his final judgment, a fake fight. The people in the stands went completely crazy. The chaotic clamor had already converged into a simple yet heart-sinking sound: kill, kill, kill. On the fighting stage, the faces of the two teenagers were deathly pale. They wanted to struggle, but they were firmly clamped down by Jack's iron arms. Jack said with a smile, "There are no losers, and there are no winners." Before he finished his sentence, Jack exerted force in both of his arms. The crisp sound of bones breaking was transmitted to the entire audience through the microphone on his body. The shoulder bones of the two youths instantly fell apart. A powerful force closed them up, crushing their sternum and spines. Then, the two youths who were no longer human were forcibly hugged in front of Jack's chest, causing them to hug each other. A pair of faces that were bleeding from all 7 orifices collided with each other, and then softened into 2 piles of dead flesh. Jack relaxed his arms, and the 2 corpses slid down. Without even looking, he crossed his arms and waved. Team ending, friendly match. Pass. F***CK. Without waiting for the next scene to change, the display suddenly caved in and cracked. Cragburst's fist had directly smashed it apart. Such an intense reaction thoroughly exposed Cragburst's position. But how could he care? He spat again, a bunch of dregs. The quiet contestant turned his face. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, but this emotion was extinguished before it could reach his face. In the end, he simply spat out 2 words. You guys? Cragburst stared at him with wide eyes. Kid, you want to participate in this bullshit fight? I'm the next one. Cragburst waved his hand roughly. Fuck the next one. Since I'm here, there will never be a next one. That way leads to the fighting arena, right? Cragburst was about to step out as he spoke. Not only was his sense of justice bursting, but the things that happened in this fighting arena made him, a fighting enthusiast, feel disgusted. Luo Nan helplessly called for Cragburst to stop when he saw that Cragburst was about to smash the fighting arena to pieces. This was already completely out of line with their original intentions, okay? I'm willing to bet that as soon as you enter the arena, Jack will immediately disappear without a trace. Even if you knock over everyone in the arena, what's the point of letting this murderer escape? That's the problem with your scouting. Why haven't you found that black-skinned rat yet? Cragburst made the same mistake as Luo Nan in his excitement. He forgot that he was communicating through the psychic wave network and directly spoke. The quiet competitor saw that Cragburst was talking to the air. His eyes streaked across the air and didn't see anything else. In the end, his eyes stopped on the crow on Cragburst's shoulder. He opened his mouth, a little hesitant, but finally said, "Sir, are you talking to the crows?" Cragburst stared blankly for a moment. He turned his head to look and said, baffled, yeah. Cragburst regretted it as soon as the words left his mouth. Such a reply was too stupid. But at that moment, the quiet contestant, who had been expressionless all this while, actually smiled. "So it's Mr. Crow. Can I talk to him too?" A slightly shaky smile and surprisingly childish words blossomed in the narrow lounge. It was also at this time that Cragburst and Luo Nan truly and clearly realized that this fighter, who was about to walk onto the fighting stage and receive fatal adjudication, was truly just a half-grown child. At the same time, the deathly still eyes of the 15 or 16-year-old boy in front of him flashed slightly. His entire body's life force and spiritual energy rippled out from his long and narrow eyes. Cragburst didn't know what to say when faced with such a face. In the end, he could only shrug his shoulders. "Fine. If he's willing." Borrowing the force of Cragburst's shrug, ink flew and jumped, landing directly on the arm of the quiet contestant. Of course, this was under Luo Nan's indication. "Oh." The quiet contestant was delighted by Ink's intelligence. Then he slightly straightened up and bowed very solemnly toward Ink. "My name is Roy One. They call me Marauder, but I'm nothing more than a crow. This is my 100th match, and it's also my last match. I hope that Mr. Crow can give me his blessings." This time, there were a few more words. Luo Nan discovered that the quiet contestant was called Roy One, right? His voice was quite special. It seemed that his voice hadn't gone through puberty yet. There was a bit of sharpness within the hoarseness, and there was a natural resonance of breath. It was very unique. It made people feel that if he were to sing, he would be quite good. That, Cragburst didn't quite understand. He tried to interrupt but was stopped by Luo Nan. This sort of feeling was far too familiar. The current Roy One was the same as Luo Nan many times. He was completely trapped in his own circle, forming his own logic. There was no need to forcefully break it. Perhaps this was the chance for him to relax the most. It was the moment he treasured the most. And at this time, the human-faced arachnid began to stir. Within the eyes of this newly promoted glutton, there was a bright seed rising from the dark and desolate abyss. Even though the seed was bound and surrounded by the filthy and turbid streams, it was pure and untainted. It was pure and transparent. Chapter 110. Luo Nan's senses were synchronized with the human-faced arachnids. The human-faced arachnid was paying intense attention to Luo Nan. Such a strong stimulation also made some of the muddled information clear. Sure enough, the human-faced arachnid no longer treated the turbid flow of emotions as food after leaping from a plankton to a fish. What it was truly interested in right now was the spiritual seed that undulated up and down within the turbid flow. In reality, it was something that lived within the turbid flow of emotions, yet it was completely different from the turbid flow. It was something that possessed more vitality. It wasn't easy to form such a spiritual seed. One must have the mental cultivation to overcome filthy emotions and desires, as well as a basic positive attitude in order to finally take shape. Just like Roy One, he had only been in embryonic form a long time ago. It wasn't until he spoke to Mr. Crow that he broke free from his deathly still and cold state of mind. Only then did this spiritual seed finally sublimate and leap to a new level. Cragburst actually had a similar spiritual seed as well, but it was hidden deep within his powerful magma-like life force. It wasn't as pure and transparent as Roy Wen's. From the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, the spiritual seed was an incomparable delicacy. Swallowing the spiritual seed was both a form of eating and evolution. Its evolution method was very lethal. It basically used the vitality and spirituality of others as nourishment. Its path of evolution was built on the foundation of destroying the hopes of others. Without a doubt, the human-faced arachnid was an existence that was evil to the extreme. Even if Luo Nan relied on its strength to a large degree, he would not deny this point. Although he did not deny it, it did not mean that he would allow it. Otherwise, what was the difference between it and the human-faced arachnid? Luo Nan's complete control over the human-faced arachnid was displayed without restraint. No matter how intense the human-faced arachnid's desire to eat was, the heavily chained crow shook, and it had to be well behaved. At this moment, someone walked in from the passageway that led to the fighting arena. The moment the door opened, the noise from the fighting arena almost overwhelmed the small resting room. Fortunately, it was quickly isolated again. That person said loudly, "Roy won, get ready to go on stage. The incomparable 100th match." Who are you?" "Your grandfather." Cragburst revealed an evil grin towards that person. Before that person could cry out in shock, Cragburst slapped him unconscious to the ground. Roy turned a blind eye to this. He was already completely immersed in his own world. He stood up and gently swung his arms up and down. "Well, Mr. Crow, here comes my last battle. You won't be stingy with your blessings, right?" Swish. Amidst the chaotic and distorted roars, there was a strange voice mixed with it. "Male and female monsters. Flat-chested witches. Take it off completely. Verify her identity." Cragburst couldn't catch his breath properly. He choked and nearly caused ink to go askew. Luonan's soul body nearly lost its grip on the chain and let the human-faced arachnid charge out. A woman? I couldn't tell at all. Cragburst was stupefied in place. Who would have thought? Roy Wen's upper body was bared from start to finish. Her attitude was natural, and she didn't have any obvious secondary sexual characteristics. Even if she did, it would be submerged under the lines of her thin and hard muscles. Luonan was a bit embarrassed as well, but this awkward thought was forcibly severed when Roy Wen stepped onto the fighting stage and exposed her thin body to the gazes of thousands of people. Cragburst held open the soundproof door that was about to close, so that the clamor of the fighting arena could be heard in an unending stream. "Oh, oh, oh, I'll grant you the path to leave. Bye bye bye. Let's start the auction today. I want to taste the taste of the flat-chested witch." Cheers, clamor, and whistles rang out without end. Several hundred rich and powerful people, who were likely to make a name for themselves in various fields, used the body and life of this little girl to obtain stimulation that couldn't be obtained on the level of normal society. And Roy won. The turbid flow of filth surged up from all directions. But that pure spiritual seed remained untainted by even a speck of dust. This girl, whose gender was hard to distinguish, had already been completely shielded from the influence of the filth of the outside world. But no matter what, why was such a girl placed in such a filthy place? Cragburst didn't make a sound as he walked forward with large strides. Luonan was a bit unable to restrain himself. He actually didn't stop Cragburst when he walked forward. Cragburst walked out of the passageway. It was reasonable to say that his large and unfamiliar face was the type that would attract a lot of attention. But right now, the vast majority of the people in the fighting arena had their attention focused on the fighting stage. They didn't notice Cragburst at all. But Roy Wen, who was on the fighting stage, turned her head without any warning. Her cold and clear gaze made Cragburst halt once more. He wanted to advance, but he couldn't. Chapter 111. Roy Wen quickly straightened her body and calmly stood in the center of the boxing ring. Her head was slightly drooped, allowing the rich and powerful people in the stands to wantonly size her up and evaluate her body. They constantly raised the stakes in the gambling house, causing the atmosphere to heat up even more. Cragburst's mouth didn't stop cursing the moment she walked through the tunnel. He turned his head to look at the spectator stands in all four directions. He just wanted to find someone he didn't like and give them a fierce beating. The problem was, there wasn't a single person in the entire arena that he didn't want to beat up. Has Jack been found yet? Cragburst paid special attention to the referee of this match. Unfortunately, it wasn't Jack. This made him even more vexed. Luonan didn't respond. Right now his mental senses had already covered the entire fighting arena. With this as the center, it covered a vast area with a radius of over 500 meters. It was equal to encompassing the greater half of the Deshang building within it. Even though the sensing range was slightly reduced due to the differences in the building materials and the interference of the radio waves, and the precision was still on the millimeter level, it was not a reason why Jack could not be captured. The modified human seemed to have completely evaporated. At this time, Ruoye Wen's opponent was already on stage. Ignoring the string of meaningless titles, it was a stout and robust man who looked no less than 2 or 3 times bigger than Ruoye Wen. He didn't look like a 15 or 16-year-old child at all. However, the spectators in the stands were already used to it. They cheered and egged the contestant on as well. "Dope boy. Come on, powder keg, it's time to explode." They're going to do it on stage. They're so compatible. Luo Nan's attention was drawn back. He was a complete layman in the field of fighting. He only had a vague concept of heavyweight and the like. He couldn't help but worry for Ruoye Wen when he saw the eye-catching contrast of body shapes in the boxing ring. Crag Burst was quite disdainful of the fat man, a fellow who uses drugs to stimulate his maturation. If he continues like this, he won't even need to go on stage. His own weight will crush his bones. But it had to be said that this sort of thing like drug stimulation was very common in the underground fighting arenas. Ruoye Wen might have also taken some sort of drug to suppress the development of her secondary sexual characteristics. Otherwise, as a girl with an innately deficient physique, it would have been very difficult for her to obtain 100 victories. When all was said and done, Crag Burst and Luo Nan had no idea what was going on. In the end, Crag Burst could only comfort him, "I'm here. Even if something unexpected happens, I can save him." Ink spread its wings and slapped Crag Burst's face. This fellow didn't know how to talk. "Do we need you to save them?" The crux of the problem was that Ruoye Wen's current mental state and state were inconceivably clear and bright. But once she was destroyed by an external force, the damage to her mind would be extremely frightening. It would be much more troublesome than a pure physical injury. Luo Nan had just analyzed this point from the human-faced arachnid, but he was unable to explain it to Crag Burst. He felt stifled to the extreme. The exchange between the two was meaningless, but the development of the fight on the boxing stage caught everyone off guard. After a full 20 minutes of prelude, atmosphere, and bets, the battle began. Faced with an opponent who was at least twice as heavy as her, Ruoye Wen didn't retreat, but instead advanced. She rushed in from the front, and before Gunpowder Barrel's thick arms could close in, she had already broken his tibia with a single kick. Just as Gunpowder Barrel's fingers touched Ruoye Wen's shoulder, he lost his balance and fell to the ground in pain. Ruoye Wen easily broke away from his grasp, and took the opportunity to kick him in the head, sending him into an unconscious state. The battle ended just like that. The originally heaven-flipping scene turned cold and silent in an instant. The vast majority of people, including the wealthy guests who won their bets, were unable to accept such a simple and laughable ending. They sunk into an awkward silence. Originally, the wagered fight was just a pastime. What they truly wanted to see was the cruel and bloody scene of fists hitting flesh. Crag Burst's wild laughter and his celebratory action of raising his arms and brandishing his fists were exceptionally eye-catching under this bizarre atmosphere. Even the cameras that covered the entire arena gave him a close-up. Luo Nan wanted Ink to smack Crag Burst's head. If this wasn't exposure, then what was? On the boxing stage, the referee was stupefied for a few seconds before going forward to examine the injury. This was just a formality. His true intention was to use this opportunity to get in contact with the person in charge and figure out what to do next. However, the big boss of the fighting arena, Jack, was unable to be contacted from beginning to end. In the end, it was the supervisor who spoke up and let the referee smooth things over first. The referee helplessly got up and grabbed Ruoye Wen's hand, preparing to announce the victor. But Ruoye Wen pushed his hand away. Then she borrowed the help of the referee's miniature microphone to say a few simple words, "I choose the road of adjudication." It was as if a bomb had been forcefully shoved into the oppressive and awkward atmosphere of the fighting arena with these words. First came the low clamor of several hundred people. Then came the sounds of cheering, laughing, cursing, and whistling. They flooded the entire fighting arena. The atmosphere exploded in an instant, wishing it could flip over the entire Dashang building. Aha! Challenger. Traitor. The flat-chested witch's counterattack. Stupid woman. Has your brain turned into muscle? Go die. Just tear her to shreds. No. Break her 4 limbs. Knock out her teeth. I want it. I want it. The several hundred rich and powerful spectators had personally drawn up the rules. They had designed a seemingly magnanimous path of escape. But when this rule was finally challenged, not many people could remain calm. The so-called magnanimity was just a symbolic footnote they made for their lofty status. Touching it was an offense. So in the end, all the emotions converged together to transform into a uniform howl: adjudication. 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 The referee also returned to his senses from the unexpected change. He actually felt that he had been saved. A laughable battle that had been doused in cold water had suddenly turned into a large bomb that ignited everyone's emotions. Good, good. At this time, the projectors all over the fighting arena had already taken advantage of the opportunity to broadcast information related to the road of adjudication. Various images flashed in succession, listing the 3 deathly steps of King of Fists, Beast King Battle, and Adjudication Battle. The first 2 stages, as their names implied, were fights with true adult fighters and wild and untamed beasts. Only then was it the 3rd stage. The projector timely displayed the image of a calm and callous white man wearing a referee uniform, adjudicator, Jack. The gang leader here, the gold medal host, the referee, and the murderer who had killed Roy Wen's brother, was precisely the boss of the final stage. Each projector also timely displayed the scene of many contestants, including Roy Wen's brother, dying at the hands of this callous referee. The fighting arena emitted a sharp whistling sound with each life disappearing until it finally stopped at the scene of Jack waving his hands and denying everything. The entire fighting arena was about to boil over. Chapter 112. Luo Nan's soul body stood towering amidst this wanton and rushing torrent of emotions. Originally, he should have been angry, but from his unique perspective, he saw Roy Wen, who continued to stand silently on the fighting stage after her words. He also saw her spiritual seed that was submerged in the turbid flow, yet remained untainted from beginning to end by a speck of dust. A wondrous calm arrived. Just like this, Luo Nan looked down from high above, coldly looking down at the several hundred warped faces. His mental senses were like a large net that didn't let anything through. It covered every nook and cranny within a 500-meter radius. At the same time, it included the emotional movements of every single person. The vast majority of people were fanatical, but there were some people who were a bit special. For example, this person was a bit impatient. Luo Nan's attention naturally shifted. This was a certain VIP room in the upper part of the fighting arena. A man dressed in a suit and leather shoes was pacing endlessly in the room, shouting, "Jack! Jack! Damn it! I know you heard me." The high-priority communicator crackled with static extremely clearly. A voice transmitted back approximately 2 seconds later, "What's up?" "Found it." Luo Nan instantly focused his attention, increasing his precision in all aspects. He felt that it wasn't enough, so he simply shifted his soul body over. He was in the VIP room, sticking to the back of the contact's neck to receive the message from the communicator. The contact was excited to finally get in touch with that damn Jack. He never would have thought that there was a spirit behind him that was receiving the message at the same time as him. In fact, the information Luo Nan received far exceeded that of the contact. After increasing his precision, Luo Nan was able to see not only the tangible substance, but he was also able to capture the interweaving electrical waves in the air. It was impossible for Luo Nan to know the information transmitted by the electrical waves due to his lack of the ability to transform and analyze. However, he was able to refer to the continuous interweaving and spreading fluctuations within the communicator to determine the approximate direction. This was his first attempt, but it wasn't easy to realize a tracking in the information society where countless electrical waves interweaved and covered. Fortunately, the contact and Jack continued to communicate. The contact explained to Jack in as much detail as he could. During this time, the buzzing noise of interference continued to ring. The quality of the call was extremely bad. In the end, the contact didn't even know what he said. "Damn it, Jack. Where the hell are you? On the road to heaven. Jack sounded like he was doing some sort of exercise. His voice was a bit breathless. Now isn't the time for jokes. You must come back. Immediately. I was just about to touch heaven. To hell with heaven. Roy 1 wants to charge through the path of adjudication. It was Roy 1. Didn't you say that any news related to this woman must be reported to you immediately? There was a sudden silence on the other side. After a full 5 seconds, Jack finally replied, who was in the first 2 stages. The contact was overjoyed to see that Jack finally understood the seriousness of the matter. He quickly continued to report the latest situation. The first obstacle is Jerome, our chief combat coach. This pass is meaningless. Next stage. But, oh my god. The tycoons in the fighting arena all screamed like they'd gone mad. This was because Roy 1 had paid the price of bruising her wrist just a second ago. She'd made another terrifying close-quarters assault. Her knee had fiercely smashed into Rongda's crotch. This robust man's physique wasn't inferior to Crag Burst's as he bent over in pain. Her elbow smashed into his throat, smashing his entire Adam's apple into mush. The fractured bones were displaced, and she cut open his carotid artery. Asphyxiation and arterial bleeding caused this strong man to fall to the ground, twitching as he quickly walked towards death. Roy 1 gazed at the dying man on the ground and said softly, for the 70% eliminated. The contact was already stupefied from watching. He couldn't bear this kind of loss any longer. Rongda was once the champion of the Underground Fighting Alliance. She must have concealed her strength. What the hell is going on here? Who taught her? Damn it, damn it, damn it. Jack already understood everything from the contact's reaction. He issued orders with a hoarse voice, raise the protective walls on all fronts right now. Isolate the fighting arena. Tell that group of trash that we need a certain amount of time to prepare for the Beast King battle. Prepare for what? You go contact Mr. Ma. Tell him that the high-quality life and death duel he's been dreaming of has arrived. We'll send out the 100 victory which, Roy 1. He only needs to bring his family's little darling over. I'll give him 10 minutes of time. Oh, Mr. Ma's collection. Jack, you're really too evil. The contact came to a sudden realization. He greatly praised Jack's way of thinking. He immediately hung up and hastily went to find someone. Roy 1. Forget it. I'll just go with her cheap older brother. Jack removed his wristband and casually tossed it to the side. Don't anyone disturb me again. He was suddenly startled before his voice fell. He slowly raised his head. His undamaged right eye and the mechanical electronic eye focused at the same time. They stared at the empty space in front of them. He finally found it. Luo Nan's soul body appeared in this room. He also noticed Jack's reaction, but right now he was even more shocked at Jack's current location. Jack was still inside the Deshang building, but he was on the top floor of the building, the 141st floor. This landmark building of the River Wu district had a height of around 600 meters. The 141st floor was over 550 meters in height. It just so happened to exceed the range of Luo Nan's all-encompassing perception. Originally Luo Nan didn't believe that Jack would leave his usual lair and enter the privileged society that was absolutely unfriendly to gangsters like them. But the facts proved that his judgment was wrong. Not only did Jack enter, but he also arrived at the top floor of the Deshang building, which required extremely high credit privileges. He even had an independent training room here. At this moment, Jack was sitting in the middle of a pitch-black device whose purpose could not be seen. His body was connected to many wires, and powerful electric currents were piercing his body at every moment. Some of them even pulled out beautiful blue electric currents in the air. Is it charging the altered human right now? Jack's eyes were constantly changing focus. The end of the air was a wall. But before the wall, there was a reaction that made him vigilant. It appeared without end. A special scanner was installed in his body. The naked eye and the electronic eye received light waves of all frequencies and compared them with the surrounding environment. The data was calculated and processed to form an image. In the end, what appeared on his optic nervous system was an image that was as fuzzy as a shadow. He paused for a moment before speaking in a hoarse voice. Ability user? Soul configuration? Luo Nan was truly shocked. The electromagnetic gun attack on the recycling stratum really wasn't a coincidence. This Jack seemed to have some sort of method that could capture the existence of a soul body. His soul body floated a few times in the room. He discovered that although Jack's gaze was a bit sluggish, it was always able to rapidly change. This was a situation that had never happened before. Chapter 113. In the end, Jack was the first to break the silence. He stared at the empty space and said in a low voice, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know which force you belong to, but I can confirm that there was no enmity between us before today. I admire your ability, and I don't want to be your enemy. If you're unhappy with today's conflict, I'm willing to make amends. Whatever you want, I will do my best to satisfy you within my capabilities." The only response he got was the buzzing sound of the electric current. Jack paused for a moment before continuing. "Your soul configuration has yet to reach the level where your mind can interfere with matter. My nervous system has been modified, and your influence on me is negligible. Yes, there's also that big guy. He's a very headache-inducing opponent. Perhaps he's currently rushing over, but inside the Dashang building, I'll make his pace slow like a turtle. If we can't come to an agreement, we'll just have to drag it out, maybe until tomorrow morning?" Luo Nan still did not respond. There was no way to respond even if he wanted to. Jack was right about one thing. At present, he only had two means of communication. One was the psychic wave network, and the other was the local network of the format pyramid. Neither of them were useful to Jack. It was as if Jack's consciousness was hidden under a thick layer of ice water. He could reach it, but he had used up too much of his strength halfway through. It was almost nothing. Luo Nan didn't know how Jack did it. He simply blocked out Jack's voice and scanned the entire room in an attempt to discover more information. Of course, the most eye-catching thing in this training room was the pitch-black machine outside of Jack's body. With Luo Nan's meager knowledge of machinery, it was very hard for him to understand the ultimate purpose of the machine. And from the surface, it looked like the machine was just an unending stream of electricity being poured into Jack's body. Luo Nan paid attention to the voltage indicator. Any normal person would have turned into charcoal by now, but Jack seemed to be enjoying it. It could be seen that the electric current instilled by the black machine had truly cut into every part of Jack's body. Jack's muscles were twitching and trembling every second, but within this twitching and trembling, there was clearly a relatively stable rhythm. This meant that Jack had retained some control over his body. What did he just say? On the way to heaven, it was clear that such an electric infusion was beneficial to Jack. Oh, in that case, Jack continued to chatter endlessly while Luo Nan was gathering information. "I get it. You can't open your mouth, right? The research on soul configuration on Earth is still very backward, or are you just a talented person who got lucky? Very well, then. I can probably guess what you are more interested in. Intelligence, information, all kinds of knowledge that can broaden your horizons. For example, right now, I can tell you that you can use the special waveband of your soul configuration to communicate with me. This is because my body has been implanted with the corresponding transceiver. Even if I haven't used it for 2 to 3 years, it shouldn't be damaged. We can try it now. You just need to focus your mind. You have the talent to form a soul configuration, so it should be easy for you to do this." The void was silent for about 5 seconds. Then, Jack smiled. The psychic waves from the outside world were converted into recognizable information through the transceiver in his body, ringing in his ears. "I can now believe that you are indeed not from the military. If the military possessed a similar transformation project, then they wouldn't be in such a difficult situation when facing the Darksider life forms." Jack maintained his smile, making the scar on his face look less sinister. "Of course, there is a certain difference between soul configuration and Darksider life forms. We can talk about it in detail later. You really do know a lot." Luo Nan expressed his admiration for Jack's ability to bring up new information at any moment. That's why I'm a very good information peddler. Jack continued to speak with fervor and assurance. What do we talk about? Oh, right. Let's talk about why we became enemies. I think you will certainly be interested in that pretty boy Yan Yonghua. Now that you mention it, I find that I know too much. Luo Nan sneered. Yes, this fellow buried countless hooks in his words. What earth, soul configuration, psychic wave transceiver. But in reality, there was practically no valuable information that he revealed. So a second later, Luo Nan directly said, let's talk about that metal beetle. The smile on Jack's lips widened. Friend, you must be quite young. You must know that communication shouldn't be done in a fit of pique. You should think of ways to embarrass the other party. I know that you must be more interested in Yan Yonghua. Otherwise, you wouldn't have followed him. Let me think. What is his explosive point? For example, quantum corporation? Archetype format? The world's first burner? Or perhaps Deep Blue World? You must be a master storyteller. Luo Nan used psychic waves to send a mocking message, but he had no choice but to admit that the titles that Jack mentioned had nearly caused his curiosity to explode. It was as if he had bumped into a moving database of information. This fellow, Jack, was absolutely not a simple gang leader. His experiences, knowledge, and even the level of contact he had had with him far exceeded Luo Nan's previous estimations. However, let's just leave it at that for now. Jack's smile continued to persist, but a short second later, astonishment and explosive rage tore apart this layer of mask, arriving together with the darkness that enveloped the room. A power outage. The low humming of the pitch-black machine gradually came to a stop. The power outage protection was done quite well. The muscles on Jack's body only twitched a bit before returning to normal. But his mood couldn't return, damn it. What did you do? Jack roared in the darkness. He did his best to shake his arms, but this didn't give him a sliver of electricity. It's as you can see. The power is out. Luo Nan used the method that Jack taught him to maintain communication. Jack's choice of the top floor of the Deshang building as a hiding place was indeed an unimaginably brilliant move. However, as a business district with people coming and going, there were uncontrollable factors. To put it more bluntly, there were far too many human factors. Hypnosis combined with the human-faced arachnid's fishing technique was truly too useful. Luo Nan just spent a bit of time while Jack chattered on endlessly. He chose a property manager and cut off the power supply to this floor. During this time, he discovered that Jack's training room used a dedicated power supply line. But this point was meaningless in front of the manager of the building. Reality proved that no matter what function the machine Jack used, it could only be a pile of scrap metal once the power supply was cut off. I want to obtain information. You want to obtain time. The meaning of communication lies in this. But no one can obtain it. So what? It seemed that the last remnant images of his peers in the boxing ring still remained before Luo Nan's eyes. He didn't care whether or not Jack could see them. His soul body made the same negative action of crossing its arms. Chapter 114. As the last bit of electric current disappeared in the darkness, Jack's intense movements also stopped. He sat in the middle of the machine, and the wires on his body broke off one after another. In the end, all that was left was a violent gasp. The interruption of the power supply seemed to have placed an unexpected burden on Jack. However, his bionic eyes didn't dim because of the power cut. On the contrary, they became more and more dazzling as his emotions fluctuated. While panting, Jack emphasized again, "You arrogant bastard. Damn it. Do you know what you've done? I did something that made you very unhappy, and I plan to continue doing it." This was what Luo Nan said, and this was what he did. The human-faced arachnid, who had just completed its mission, had already passed through the wall and returned to Luo Nan's side. Under Luo Nan's guidance, the human-faced arachnid threw itself at Jack. Luo Nan could now confirm that Jack's previous words weren't a lie. there really was a certain difference between soul bodies and darksider life forms. Jack was clearly able to lock onto the soul body, but he was completely unaware of the arrival of the human-faced arachnid. This was despite the fact that half of the human-faced arachnid's body was about to merge into his body. But on the other hand, the human-faced arachnid couldn't seem to find a place to eat Jack. Even though Jack was enraged to the point of madness, his special soul defense was still working. Right now, the human-faced arachnid was at best a probing imaging device. Even if it could clearly probe the inner workings of Jack's brain, it wouldn't be able to create any interference. It also lacked interest. The human-faced arachnid really had no interest in Jack at all. It wasn't because the low-level turbid flow of emotions was no longer part of its menu. It was because this thing simply couldn't be eaten. It was like an excellent painter could paint a flower so lifelike that it would attract bees and butterflies, but he would never be able to pick the honey. This was the difference between a real object and a painting, the difference between reality and illusion. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, Jack's emotions were a vivid yet false picture. It could be seen that the structure and operation of Jack's brain, which had been partially modified, were shockingly concise and efficient. What kind of stimulation would trigger which cluster of neurons, what kind of neurotransmitters would be produced, and what kind of conduction between neurons would be triggered, forming a continuous running assembly line. At first glance, this was no different from a normal person's mental model. But as a matter of fact, most of the emotions and psychological activities of human beings had complicated operating mechanisms. The coordinated activation of various brain regions was far from something that could be replaced by an ideal assembly line. If one were to delve deeper into this, they would discover that Jack's seemingly efficient and concise operation mode was more of an encoding method. The human-faced arachnid's probing was extraordinarily deep. The human-faced arachnid's tentacles had already spread to every nook and cranny of Jack's body without his knowledge. Because of this, it discovered a region that had been precisely modified in the depths of Jack's brain, probably at the location of the central mass that connected the left and right thalamus. There was an even smaller core embedded within it. Almost all of Jack's nerve activities would be transmitted through the channels that had been set up in advance to exchange information with the nucleus. This nucleus would transmit the corresponding stimulation to the various nerve centers and then give feedback. Without a doubt, this core played the role of a system integration. All kinds of codes were substituted into the formula to form the answer, and then transmitted out. This was originally a natural function of the brain, but it had been replaced by the mechanical reaction of the nucleus. This crucial step was the distinction between real and fake. Were all altered humans like this? Luo Nan didn't have too much confidence in his own observations. He was still guessing at the role of the nucleus. However, there was a situation that firmly grabbed his attention. There was a thin thread coiled around this extremely secretive nucleus body. No, it was the metal beetle. That's right, this was the metal beetle that Yan Yongbua had tossed out of the car. Luo Nan was incomparably certain because there was a small half of the beetle's shape preserved at the end of the thin thread. He couldn't help but speculate that the metal beetle would completely disappear after a period of time. It would transform into the form of a thin thread. What were the conditions for the transformation? Luo Nan could more or less understand just by looking at the dark machine that had already stopped operating. It was also this coiled thread that gave Luo Nan an extremely familiar feeling. He used the human-faced arachnid as a medium to unleash his soul clairvoyance. He discovered that the thread clearly flickered with flickering electricity. And when he increased the precision of his senses a step further, he was certain that the thread had already split into countless even finer branches. Many of them had already exceeded the range of precision of his senses. Luo Nan could only see that some of these branches had pierced into the interior of the nucleus. Some of them had even seeped into the nerves and blood vessels. They had probably already spread throughout the entire brain, forming a tree-shaped structure with the nucleus as the center. This is the external neuron? What the fuck are you doing now? Luo Nan's unbridled probing methods had probably set off some sort of alarm device. Jack was horrified and startled. His blood-red robotic eyes locked rigidly onto the location of Luo Nan's soul body. But compared to these things on the surface, the changes that had occurred within Jack's brain were what truly shook Luo Nan's mind. It was that thin thread that had split into countless branches. The thin thread pierced into various parts of Jack's brain. It instantly trembled with tightly woven electrical fire. The electrical fire didn't occur on the plane of reality. At least, it wasn't limited to just that. This was because the human-faced arachnid that was deep within felt a burning sensation that was enough to endanger its existence at this very moment. It didn't need Luo Nan's command to frantically retreat outwards. Jack's mood template of rage had certainly been adjusted to the highest level. His entire body stood up, and it was also at this moment that his body clearly emitted a dark and deep glow of flames. The glow of flames came from the inside out, forcibly blasting the human-faced arachnid out of Jack's body. Moreover, the human-faced arachnid's momentum didn't decrease in the slightest as it pounced towards Luo Nan's location. The human-faced arachnid let out a pained howl. The powerful attack on the mental plane instantly swept through the many floors of the Dashang building. It was unknown how many people were innocently affected in this instant. Luo Nan was already unable to care about these things. The instant the glow of flames erupted, he exhausted all of the strength of his soul to leap through the air. Luo Nan was transported in a dizzying manner, but the distance he flew was far below Luo Nan's estimations. He just flew out of the room. The entire distance didn't exceed 20 meters. An incorporeal magnetic field formed around Jack's body when the glow of flames erupted. It warped the mental plane and even the space of reality. It was as if Luo Nan's soul body had fallen into a bottomless deep sea. An astonishing pressure came from all directions. This feeling was far too familiar. On the warship a few days ago, the burning wraith that Yuan had beheaded had suffered a similar technique. It had been locked onto, controlled, and then turned into ashes. Luo Nan's mind truly trembled as if electricity had passed through it. Chapter 115. You can't escape. Jack's hoarse voice was like the low cry of a deep-sea monster. It penetrated through the walls, shaking Luo Nan's soul body to the point of being slightly shaken. Was this guy really a burner? Based on the information that Luo Nan knew, burners were not like this. At the very least, the burners under Yan Hong's archetype formatting theory were not like this. Otherwise, there would be no need for the deep blue platform or the exoskeleton armor. He could just modify his entire body. However, what Jack had displayed was indeed the power of the format of fire. In the next second, the thick and heavy walls of the training room rumbled and violently deformed. A hole had been blasted open in the center, and cracks spread out like a spider web. Jack's training room was located in the middle of the 141st floor. It was a space sealed off by 4 thick and heavy soundproof walls. Only one side had an open door. The direction Luo Nan chose to jump in was the opposite of the main door. He stretched out the normal path of pursuit to the greatest extent. However, Jack's choice was completely different from a normal person's. Using Jack as a reference, Luo Nan was actually really affected by the human mindset. He should have gone up or down just now. There was a floor separating them. Even if there was interference from the magnetic field, the situation would be completely different. Luo Nan didn't have the mind to reflect on his actions. He still tried to pull away, but the pressure his soul body endured continued to rise, making it difficult for him to move forward. Hell, even the military's burners, with the support of their exoskeleton armor, didn't have this kind of power. The wall exploded with a bang following another heavy strike. Jack walked out with large strides. His naked eye and bionic eye locked firmly onto Luo Nan's position. At this moment, the scene of flames soaring around his body had already disappeared, but the magnetic field that was like the deep sea was even more powerful. Through soul observation, he could confirm that Jack's entire body was deeply integrated with the deep sea EM field. The energy circulating within his body endlessly increased the effectiveness of the magnetic field. And the exertion of strength with every movement could bring about an intense change in the magnetic field. This was undoubtedly a terrible experience for Luo Nan. Jack stared at the direction where the soul was. His rage seemed to have been controlled, and his voice became hoarse and deep. "Young man, Do you know how great of a price I paid in order to obtain the Deep Sea Type 4 Dynamo Core? Do you know how much your naughty behavior will cost me? Dynamo Core? Is that the official name for the external neuron? Also, does this model also represent the corresponding ability? Just like the deep sea EM field that Jack was radiating, Luo Nan unconsciously pondered over this word, and Jack didn't immediately attack him. Instead, he sized up the surroundings with a somewhat uncertain appearance. Ability users nowadays are really amazing. I actually saw a young man who can raise a Darksider life form. Moreover, that breed seems to be quite interesting. Jack should be probing. Though he had injured the human-faced arachnid, he was still unable to capture its whereabouts. Luo Nan responded with silence. His attitude made Jack laugh coldly. Alright, I'll add this incident to my database and tell it to people who are willing to listen to my story. As for you, I have no desire to communicate at all. The exact same words were returned to him by Jack. If it was in the past, Luo Nan would have felt that Jack's words were sharp. But right now, he couldn't help but think. Was this Jack's free will, or was it the result of an artificial intelligence's calculations? This riddle would not be solved in a short amount of time. Luo Nan deeply felt Jack's murderous intent. He didn't hesitate any longer. He concentrated all of his energy and fled regardless of everything. This time, he learned from his previous lesson and directly fled to the bottom of the floor. Though the distance was even more pitiful than last time, less than 4 meters, the floor was constructed from a combination of concrete and high-strength light alloy. It was much tougher than the wall material that Jack had smashed apart. Jack's attack smashed down and the floor instantly caved in, but it didn't immediately collapse. Luo Nan took advantage of this opportunity to dive down another floor. The straight-line distance between him and Jack had already increased to over 30 meters. The binding power of the deep sea EM field suddenly weakened. Luo Nan's heart was filled with joy. He was about to forcefully leap through space once more. This time, his target was the night sky outside of the Deshang building. As long as he reached the void where there was nothing to rely on, Jack wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Then a muffled bang rang out and the bullet, which possessed powerful kinetic energy, instantly pierced through 2 floors of the floor. Even though the bullet deviated a bit in the process of piercing through, it still exploded near Luo Nan's soul body. The churning cloud of fire had the effect of a magnetic field, giving his soul body enormous interference. Luo Nan had seen similar special ammunition on the warship before, but the effect of this round was clearly stronger. And the ammunition wasn't just one round. It was a continuous barrage of bullets. All of them passed through the hole that had just been pierced through, exploding in succession. For a time, the cloud of fire pervaded the air, igniting a few flammable items on the floor. The 2 floors of the floor were forcibly smashed through in this one delay. Jack flew down just like that. The powerful deep sea EM field had already enveloped Luo Nan before he even arrived. It was as if Luo Nan's soul body had been thrown into the deep sea once more. It suddenly became sluggish and difficult to move. And this time, the temperature at the bottom of the sea rose crazily. It was like a volcano erupting in the sea, wanting to cook him thoroughly. Luo Nan suddenly felt a sense of weakness as he sank into it. It came from nothing, and it gradually became clear. It wasn't that Jack's format of fire or the deep sea EM field caused great harm to his soul body. Instead, the human-faced arachnid, who acted as an external fuel tank, had received heavy damage from the first wave of attacks. It had yet to recover. Luo Nan hadn't truly reached the standard of an out-of-body state. He was able to roam freely in the form of a soul body. To a large extent, he had to rely on the energy provided by the human-faced arachnid. Jack's format of fire exploded, inadvertently striking Luo Nan's vital point. This wasn't good, and at this time, Jack's grand action of tearing down walls and setting them on fire finally triggered a response from the building's defense system. Right now, the floor the 2 were on was the office area of a certain large company. It was the weekend, so there wasn't a single person inside. The first to respond was the building's automatic mechanical security system. The door to the office area rumbled open following the simultaneous activation of the fire alarm and burglary alarm lights. A civilian defense robot drove into the room. The barrel of its anti-riot gun was aimed at the only visible target, Jack. The problem was that the anti-riot gun hadn't even fired when the robot received a brand new command. It entered a docile standby state. Then the fire alarm and the burglary alarm all stopped. The building recovered its silence. Only the office items that had been set ablaze within the flames were left to burn. Jack didn't even turn his head during this entire process. He just stared dead at the location of Luo Nan's soul body. Chapter 116. Ronan had witnessed the entire process of Jack controlling the situation. It was as if Jack was holding a remote control for action and stop. With just a press, the security system of the entire floor, or even the entire building, froze. This scene absolutely wasn't the result of Jack's high level of authority in the Deshang building. This was because the robot didn't have any procedures to test his authority. It directly ceased all activities and didn't have any power to resist. This made Luo Nan think of Crag Burst's pitiful jeep. Luo Nan finally broke his silence. He used psychic waves to transmit. How did you do it? Oh, another exchange? Jack sneered. Why are you making a fuss? You can control. Oh, and Darksider life forms. I can control machinery. That's fair. Jack didn't refuse to communicate, but he didn't respond directly either. He didn't mind dealing with Luo Nan a bit more. After all, he couldn't find any traces of the Darksider life form from beginning to end. This caused him to brood over it. He needed time to adjust the relevant parameters of the database and unceasingly revise the range of his detection. Luo Nan could more or less guess what Jack was doing. After all, many of Jack's detection methods required the use of that electronic eye, so Jack was constantly turning his head. This was good news. It seemed that Jack was very afraid of the Darksider life form. Perhaps there was still a threat to the current him? Luo Nan secretly paid attention to this, but right now a large portion of his mind couldn't help drifting in the direction of controlling machinery. Jack and Yan Yongbo's previous actions reminded him of another similar example. Gear's underground laboratory. To put it more bluntly, the external neuron. Luo Nan could confirm that the thread in Jack's brain was indeed the external neuron. It was also the dynamo core that Luo Nan spoke of. It was this product that seemed to surpass the technology of Earth that allowed it to bypass all authority and directly control all information devices, manipulating them at will. And now, new facts told him that other than the aforementioned functions, this thing was also the key to the burner and format of fire. Such a strange creation had actually accompanied him for 5 years, and it was mailed to him by that coward. What did that mean? What did that mean? It was hard for Luo Nan to divert his attention to ponder over this matter during the violent storm of pursuit and escape. Now that he had the slightest bit of time, the relevant thoughts were like heart-devouring bugs, gnawing and grinding in his heart. External neuron? Dynamo core? Burners? Gang leader? Yan Yonghua? Quantum Corporation, and that coward. Luo Nan's mind was practically tied into a dead knot by the sudden clues and bursts of information. If he didn't loosen up a bit, then his soul would suffocate. Luo Nan suddenly felt very regretful. Perhaps he really should have listened to Jack's 2 more stories. No matter what, he wanted to know what kind of connection there was between Jack, the mafia leader, and that coward. Right now, Luo Nan had to work hard for this goal. He did his best to maintain a clear line of thought. He used psychic waves to transmit information as slowly as possible to probe Jack's reaction, controlling machines at will. You don't have that ability. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiding in the recycle stratum as a mafia boss. Instead, you'd be running out to do whatever you want. Jack laughed hoarsely. Are you trying to provoke me? Kid, you've already succeeded before, so you don't have to worry about how you die. I admit that you have the ability to kill me. After all, you are already a burner. What, did I say something wrong? Luo Nan saw Jack grin from the corner of his mouth. The sarcasm within was thick. Jack shrugged his shoulders. It's nothing. People always have the right to be ignorant. I don't have the obligation to correct them. Kid, there's no need to probe anymore. Call your pet. I'll give you a more satisfying death. Luo Nan would be stupid to listen to Jack's words. But Jack's sarcastic smile and tone were quite interesting. It was a kind of aloof superiority. The people he spoke of didn't seem to be specifically referring to Luo Nan. Instead, it was an unbridled map cannon. It was brimming with the flavor of everyone in the world is drunk, but I am the only sober one. Luo Nan remembered that a considerable portion of Jack's high-level mental activity originated from the data template of the nucleus. In a certain sense, Jack was more real than any normal person. Then where did this sense of superiority come from? Luo Nan sized up Jack once more. The information he obtained from the mafia members showed that this savage and cruel fellow had become the mafia leader of this region in just a span of 2 to 3 years. He started off as a fighting instructor. He used the bloody 70% elimination rule to rapidly become an important figure in the fighting arena. Then he became a referee, a host, a partner, and finally became the chief spokesperson of the fighting arena's mafia power. His abilities overflowed as a mafia leader, but this didn't mean that he was the same in other areas. Then, it's the metal beetle, right? Luo Nan suddenly spoke up and went straight to the point. Jack was a bit startled, then he laughed. Are you still going to be angry, young man? Luo Nan ignored Jack's interference. His thoughts were so certain that everything that happened within Jack's body was exposed to the prying eyes of the human-faced arachnid. Yan Yongboi used it to control our jeep and then you came over to deal with it. But you're clearly more interested in the metal beetle itself. Oh, the metal beetle is too unprofessional. You call it the dynamo core? The Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core. It's a mystical device that allows ordinary altered humans to possess abilities similar to a burner. Jack was silent for a moment. The dark red electronic eyes that had been searching for the human-faced arachnid turned back to stare at the blurry figure of Luo Nan's soul body. You're trying to display your own intelligence. But we don't recruit new people here. The intensity of the deep sea EM field continued to increase as Jack spoke. Luo Nan's soul body felt even worse. From Luo Nan's perspective, the most important thing to do right now was to break free from Jack's control as quickly as possible and flee far away. However, the spiritual light gushing out from his mind interweaved into sections of thought. Under the pressure of the outside world, he pieced them together and advanced layer by layer. He was unwilling to interrupt this process. The dynamo core is very precious to you, so Yan Yongbo will use it to pay you. But looking at the model number, this should be a product that has already been put into production. At the very least, it's a trial production series of products. The only ones who possess this kind of manufacturing ability and are closely related to the burner are Quantum Corporation, and their related powers. Luo Nan's brain power operated. It had certainly reached the pinnacle of his 15 years of life. He didn't directly converse with Jack. Instead, he endlessly tossed out a few bait in his words. At the same time, he earnestly observed all of Jack's reactions, using them to revise his own inferences. Of course, there's also you. You're an altered human, but you don't come from the military. You just happen to be so adaptable to the burner's abilities. The number of people in this world who can do this can be counted on one hand. So I believe that you also come from Quantum Corporation and that you've always worked for the apex technology company of this Earth. Luo Nan saw Jack's face reveal a mocking smile of superiority just as the psychic wave message was transmitted. Chapter 117. Seeing Jack's expression, Luo Nan seemed to be able to hear his main body's heart skip a beat. He had deliberately added the modifier phrase, Earth's top technology company, in order to probe into Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. He had thought of many reactions beforehand, but he never imagined that Jack would bring this smile over. Even the curve of Jack's mouth was exactly the same. Luo Nan admitted that he had to reconsider Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. But before that, there was one thing he needed to make clear: why? Why would a gang leader holed up in the recycling stratum use this sort of attitude to point at a power that was ranked in the top 3 in terms of market value in the world? Using the simplest of straight-line logic to consider things, wouldn't that mean that behind Jack's back, at least in his consciousness, there was a colossus that could look down upon Quantum Corporation, the Earth's apex tech company, with eyes of contempt? Luo Nan once again thought of the hooks buried within Jack's words. Soul configurations, deep blue world. These were terms he had never heard of before. Now that he thought about it, it was extremely likely that they hid a world-shocking secret. Is that coward related to these things? How deep was the connection? Thoughts spun in his mind, but time didn't allow Luo Nan to think too much. He could only continue his previous train of thought and make some slight adjustments to probe Jack's background. You're both employees of Quantum Corporation, but Yan Yonghua can control the Rainbow Fund. You can only hang around in a gang. He can casually toss out a dynamo core and you'll fight to the death for it. From what I know, Yan Yonghua hasn't been a part of Quantum Corporation for long. Is it because of his strength that he was able to quickly climb to a high position? Or is it because of his father? Or perhaps, as an altered human who needs the help of a dynamo core to possess the abilities of a burner is destined to be a defective product from the production line. You're too damn smart. Another humming sound rang out from within the low and hoarse roar. The pressure and heat of the deep CEM field rapidly rose. Under the sudden increase in pressure, Luo Nan's soul body was forcibly compressed. Clearly, Luo Nan's words had stabbed Jack's sore spot. The smile on Jack's face completely disappeared. He reached out with his hand and pressed it against his forehead. It was as if he was concealing his momentary loss of self-control. But the electronic eye that was already on the verge of burning exposed his current mood. Fury template, highest level. Right now, Luo Nan was already straining to even transmit psychic waves. However, he was even more clear that if he were to really give up like this, Jack would very likely immediately make a move to finish him off. Time, he needed a little more time. Did I misspeak? I'm really sorry. I'm just saying my guesses. Some of them might sound stupid, but I think our current situation is even more stupid. That's right. The speaker is stupid, and the listener isn't smart either. Jack panted heavily. The last time he reacted like this was when the power went out. But this was really effective. His emotions began to recover, and he was even mocking himself. This level of control seemed to be something only a modified person who could switch their template at any time could achieve. Ronan noticed Jack's restraint. It was reasonable to say that this callous altered human had many opportunities. He could erupt with a powerful format of fire and turn Luo Nan's soul body into ashes. But he never truly made a move other than that first strike. Compared to the ruthlessness and decisiveness he displayed before, the current Jack was a little too hesitant. This had nothing to do with intelligence or stupidity. It could only be considered from a more realistic level. Was it fear of the Darksider life forms? Or was it because of a more direct, more fatal reason? Jack clearly wouldn't reveal the answer, and he also made substantial movements. He began to walk forward, closing the distance between him and Luo Nan's soul body. As the distance shrunk, the pressure of the magnetic field increased exponentially. Luo Nan tried to retreat, but the results were minimal. Jack revealed a smile once more. I've heard back in the deep blue world that it's possible to use the powerful magnetic field of the dynamo core to confine and capture souls, and even Darksider life forms. Right now, I can give it a try. The deep blue world? Luo Nan's first thought was actually the information that came from far beyond the heavens. He only truly reacted in the next moment. Jack actually wanted to capture him alive? Yes, looking at the increasing pressure of the magnetic field, Jack really did have this kind of plan. Compared to the beginning, Luo Nan's soul body had already shrunk by more than 2 times. If this continued, he would probably become the legendary, 1-inch mage, someone who could be needed by anyone. Luo Nan was already unable to think of anything else. He concentrated all of his energy, wanting to make his soul body move once more. But at this time, the only thing that could move his entire body was the heavily chained crow, which had been circulating without end from beginning to end. Chains? Luo Nan's thoughts were still unclear when the vibrating amplitude of the heavily chained crow suddenly increased. But this wasn't an internal force, it was an external impact. A sharp hissing sound rang out. A phantom pounced out from the floor below, forcibly colliding into the deep CEM field. The impact force on the mental plane actually caused the magnetic field's operation to suddenly stagnate. Luo Nan's soul body was struck by this phantom in the next moment. The phantom tightened and then loosened. Then Luo Nan flew backwards like he was riding on a cloud, escaping from the range of the deep CEM field's control. The human-faced arachnid. This malevolent monster had killed its way out when it was needed the most. Its body still carried the vapors of turbid currents of emotions. The heavy injuries from the format of fire could no longer be seen, at least on the surface. Success. Luo Nan's mind relaxed. He flipped over and stood on the back of the human-faced arachnid. He urged this monster, which had just drunk a blood potion, to fly towards the nearest outer wall of the building without turning his head. Jack's heavy and swift footsteps rang out behind him. He was still in pursuit, his speed rapidly increasing. And the large cubicle layout of this floor's office gave him ample space to accelerate. The deep CEM field followed Jack's pursuit, moving like a shadow behind Luo Nan and the human-faced arachnid. It was like a silent evil beast, staring fixedly at its prey, wanting to devour it as soon as possible. But in the end, it was useless. A distance of several dozen meters was far too short for a soul body. Luo Nan and the human-faced arachnid directly smashed through the outer wall of the building in the time of a single breath. They flashed again in the interweaving neon lights of the night sky, flying 1,000 meters into the air. Jack charged to the end of the building. His momentum hadn't dissipated yet, so he heavily smashed into the French window. The tempered glass, which was of considerable strength and toughness, exploded with spiderweb cracks in an instant. Unexpectedly, it didn't shatter. But the lightweight alloy that held the four sides in place was unable to withstand the impact. The entire French window was peeled off from the wall by Jack, falling rapidly to the ground. Jack used the momentum to dissipate his momentum. He stood at the edge of the empty building and pulled out a thick-barreled handgun. It should be the one that had shot out the military special ammunition. The muzzle of the gun was aimed at the night sky. But in the end, Jack didn't fire in vain. He just stared coldly at the empty shadow in the night sky. Only after a long while did he turn around and leave. Chapter 118. Leave? Aren't you taking things too easy? Luo Nan stood in the night sky. He watched Jack hatefully leave through the crisscrossing light rail outside of the Deshang building. He let out a long sigh in his heart and laughed in spite of himself. There was a very interesting relationship between Luo Nan and Jack right now. Jack's deep CEM field possessed the ability to instantly heavily injure or even kill Luo Nan, but its effective range was limited. Luo Nan himself didn't have any methods to threaten Jack, but he had an extremely long range of perception with a radius of 500 meters. This meant that when Luo Nan pulled apart the distance between him and Jack, it would be nearly impossible for Jack to escape Luo Nan's tracking and locking onto him. Luo Nan cut a sorry figure within the deep CEM field. Now Jack's movements would be just as distressed. Each and every one of Jack's movements would be exposed to Luo Nan's clairvoyance. Luo Nan patted the human-faced arachnid lightly, indicating for it to follow. The human-faced arachnid suddenly flew into the air. It swiftly plunged down from the night sky and crashed into the Deshang building once more. It passed through the wall as if it was nothing. The turbid smoke curled around its body, making it look demonic and bizarre. Luo Nan's mental senses locked onto Jack, who was over 20 floors away. A distance of 100 meters, centimeter precision, and several dozen floors. It was safe and meticulous at the same time, and Luo Nan could react in time. Jack was certainly able to sense Luo Nan's monitoring and locking onto him. He turned his head repeatedly along the way, accurately locking onto the direction of Luo Nan's soul body every time. But so what? He still couldn't do anything to Luo Nan. Luo Nan was much more relaxed this time. He stared at Jack's whereabouts as he sorted out the situation with the human-faced arachnid. Right now Luo Nan's soul body was standing on the back of the human-faced arachnid. The sensation on the mental plane was very strange. Even though his nervous system was able to restore the sensation to the greatest degree, there were still some things that were impossible to translate. He could only understand them. Luo Nan came into contact with the human-faced arachnid. It was like he was standing on top of a cloud covered in burrs. There was nothing below him, but there was the scorching internal pressure and external tension acting at the same time, propping up the sensation on the mental plane. The so-called internal pressure and tension was just a rough feeling. The human-faced arachnid's foundation structure was actually hidden within. The current precision of Luo Nan's senses wasn't enough to pry into the mysteries within, but he could roughly sense that the foundation structure of the human-faced arachnid was actually a bit loose. The human-faced arachnid had collided head-on with Jack's format of fire when the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries. Most of its devil body had been melted away by the format of fire. Less than half of its body remained. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, this sort of injury was serious but not fatal. It could consume a spiritual seed, or its own kind to achieve rapid recovery and even increase in power. But Luo Nan instinctively rejected the first evil method. As for the second method, where would he find other human-faced arachnid clones in such a short time? Even if they found it, it was hard to say who would swallow who. Therefore, Luo Nan could only choose the stupidest path for him: go drink water from the turbid flow of emotions. Drink until you're full. It didn't matter if the human-faced arachnid was happy or not. This was the only way for the human-faced arachnid to recover as soon as possible. Fortunately, the underground fighting arena at the bottom of the Dashang building was a dirty reservoir of negative emotions. Luo Nan gave the human-faced arachnid a death order. He would eat wherever he went, but he had to avoid Roy One and Crag Burst. In a certain sense, his conversation with Jack was tantamount to buying time for the human-faced arachnid. Right now, Luo Nan's plan could be considered a success. The human-faced arachnid had recovered a bit of its vitality, saving Luo Nan from the most fatal danger. But from another perspective, the consequences of forcing the human-faced arachnid to drink dirty water were extremely serious. Even though the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries from the format of fire, its foundation was still quite solid. It was just weak due to excessive consumption. Now this fellow appeared to have an imposing aura, but its foundation was quite unstable. It had dropped by more than one level from its peak, and it wasn't easy to make up for it. Luo Nan knew from this that the grade of food was extremely important to the human-faced arachnid. It absolutely could not touch the return grass unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, were the people in the fighting arena still alive? Crag Burst's voice came over just as this thought flashed through his mind. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Scout, did you get disconnected? Nope. From beginning to end, Luo Nan hadn't informed Crag Burst that he had come alone to find Jack. On one hand, he didn't want to expose the existence of his soul body. On the other hand, he felt that Roy One, who was in the fighting arena, needed Crag Burst's attention. He had considered everything thoroughly, but he never thought that he would be faced with such a dangerous situation. It was reasonable to say that with the existence of the Hexaear, the communication between the two should have been unobstructed. The two had even spoken to each other before facing off against Jack head-on. Chapter 119. The human-faced arachnid was a first-rate looter and arsonist. Luo Nan was certain that the human-faced arachnid had just swept through this place wantonly. It was not an exaggeration to say that it had sucked the marrow from the bones. But during this process, the human-faced arachnid displayed its outstanding looting techniques. It swallowed the negative emotions and the corresponding energy and vitality. It hollowed out the foundations of the vast majority of people here, leaving behind some floating soil and leaves. Then it lit a fire to its heart's content. The negative emotions that went out of control were the spark. The floating energy and vitality were the fuel to ignite the fire. There were many examples like this in reality. The weaker the body, the more uncontrollable the desire. The moment one lost control, the last bit of vitality within one's body would be completely squeezed out and burned away. Right now, the rich people in the stands, including their attendants and secretaries, and the large amount of related staff members of the fighting arena had sunk into this situation. They were completely unaware of it. When Luo Nan saw through the crux of this, the situation of the fighting arena became completely different in his eyes. This wasn't a fighting arena at all. It was clearly a brazier that was about to burn dry. Or perhaps it was a deep mine that was filled with gas. It was the kind that had already been ignited. The enormous amount of negative emotions and the floating energy and vitality formed a cloud of fire that was hard to see with the naked eye. It diffused out on the mental plane. If these people could sense their own souls, they would discover that the most terrifying feeling of suffocation had already descended upon their heads. Only an awakened like Cragburst could feel the intense feeling of disharmony within. He felt an enormous rejection towards this environment. Why did it create this environment? Luo Nan was disinclined to think too much about the final fate of the rich people in the stands. Instead, he was quite curious about the human-faced arachnid's way of doing things. In any case, Jack wasn't doing anything special right now. Luo Nan patted the human-faced arachnid beneath him, indicating for it to give him a demonstration. Of course the human-faced arachnid wouldn't refuse. It immediately flashed a few times and charged back into the fighting arena. Then it hid its demonic body deep within the cloud of fire. Its 6 heterochromatic demon eyes were half squinted and half opened. Its malevolent mouth opened wide and sucked in the cloud of fire. It then spat out the unstable muddy flow of emotions from within its body, forming a stable exchange. Luo Nan completely understood. The human-faced arachnid couldn't disobey Luo Nan's orders, so it created an environment to kill poison for itself. It did its utmost to remove the components within the turbid flow of emotions that it was unwilling to absorb. Even though he didn't know how much the human-faced arachnid would improve after this, it was fine as long as the human-faced arachnid was happy. In essence, the fighting arena was no longer a place where the rich and powerful could seek excitement and wantonly seek pleasure. Instead, it was an enormous altar. All the rulers, who believed themselves to be infallible, had become livestock placed on the altar. They were slaughtered as the human-faced arachnid desired. Though this didn't really conform to Luo Nan's aesthetics, he didn't feel the need to fix it. Glancing at Jack again, he saw that the fellow had slowed down and seemed to be thinking about something. Luo Nan didn't need the human-faced arachnid by his side at all times to track him. And the previous combat proved that it would be easier for Luo Nan to adapt if he and the human-faced arachnid were separated. Luo Nan let the human-faced arachnid stay in the fighting arena for the time being. It would be good to stabilize its unstable foundation a bit. However, less than 10 seconds after he made this decision, an unforeseen event occurred. Roy 1, who had been standing on the stage with her hands by her side, suddenly raised her head, her gaze pointing towards the void above her head. That place was originally the position of the broadcast screen. Her image was displayed on the screen. Many people noticed this change and soon they gave a reasonable explanation. Oh. The flat-chested witch is starting to get sentimental. Is she going to see her final, whole image? Look. There won't be another chance in the future. A commotion that wasn't too big nor too small set off in the fighting arena. The exceptionally excited spectators cast their filthy and mocking words together with their irrepressible emotions towards the fighting stage. Roy 1 didn't react to these stimulations at all. She just looked up in a daze. Was she looking at her own image? It wasn't like this. Luo Nan was certain that Roy 1's gaze seemed to be directed towards the broadcast screen, but in reality, the focus wasn't there at all. Instead, it was directed towards the human-faced arachnid. This was because the human-faced arachnid's 6 heterochromatic demon eyes suddenly opened in that instant and they pointed towards Roy 1's position. The demonic body that had been idle within the flaming clouds suddenly tightened. Burning negative emotions and vital energy curled around its body, forming faintly discernible rings of fire. Luo Nan's command came in at this time. He was worried that the human-faced arachnid would actually take a bite out of Roy 1, the spiritual seed that it had coveted for a long time. He wanted the human-faced arachnid to retract its position. The human-faced arachnid did as it was told, but Roy Wen's line of sight unexpectedly followed and moved without the slightest deviation. At this time, Cragburst felt that something was wrong. Hey, what is she looking at? I don't know. Luo Nan's scalp went numb when he said this. If this scene was not an illusion, then Roy Wen seemed to be able to see the human-faced arachnid. Could she see the Darksider life form? Roy Wen was an ability user? But why was there no sign before? Or had his ability just awakened? Was it the stimulation from the human-faced arachnid? A few questions popped up in his mind, but none of them could be answered. The human-faced arachnid growled in a low voice. This was the response to Luo Nan's command. Originally, only Luo Nan could hear it, but now Roy Wen, the cold and silent young girl on the fighting stage, raised her head once more. Her gaze pointed to the sky above the fighting arena. Luo Nan would be at the end of the line of sight if it extended its line of sight to approximately 300 meters. Goodness gracious. Luo Nan clearly knew that Roy Wen could not see him, but he was still shocked fiercely. He could not help but shift. Right when he was thinking about pondering over the girl's situation, he never expected that things would come and he would be overwhelmed. Jack ended his contemplation at this time and his speed suddenly increased. This fellow returned to his training room in a short half a minute. He picked up the wristband he had discarded earlier and seemed to be communicating with the outside world. Luo Nan's energy needed to be completely focused over there. Before this, he gave the human-faced arachnid another command. He told it to stay far away from Roy Wen, to stop distracting the girl's attention. After arranging everything, Luo Nan began to close the distance between him and Jack in order to increase the precision of his senses. But in the end, this was different from when he was facing his contact person. Unless Luo Nan didn't want his life anymore, it would be impossible for him to get close to Jack's side. And in this case, it was impossible to guarantee the precision of his senses. In the end, Luo Nan took the risk to advance to a distance of approximately 50 meters from Jack. He was able to feel the electrical waves radiating from the wristband, but he was only able to track it for a short distance before he had to give up. Jack's communication time was extremely short, and the direction of the transmission was clearly pointing outside of the Deshang building. The distance was so far that it far exceeded the limits of his senses. Maybe he was contacting Yan Yongbua. Luo Nan could only make blind guesses. And then, Jack entered the training room's changing room and changed his clothes. A white shirt, a black bow tie, and black trousers. These were the standard fighting referee attire. Then he shot a cold glance at Luo Nan's position, went straight out the door, and entered the high-speed elevator. He wanted to go to the fighting arena. That gaze was clearly a provocation. It was very clear that some matters in the fighting arena had been exposed. The possibility of it being the human-faced arachnid was very small. Then, Crag burst, Jack's here. Which one? Where? Crag burst was stunned for a moment, but he quickly came back to his senses. He immediately looked for Luo Nan to confirm. Chapter 120. This was a rebellion. Luo Nan flew into a sudden rage. The heavily chained crow shook, forcefully pulling the human-faced arachnid back. The human-faced arachnid's body let out a hissing shriek as the fire cloud collapsed and dispersed. It was clear that it had suffered greatly. The human-faced arachnid's reaction was so miserable that it slightly dampened Luo Nan's anger. It seemed that his control over the human-faced arachnid hadn't lost its effectiveness. He thought about how this fellow had just saved his life, and his heart softened. Moreover, what was the use of being angry at this kind of person who had no intelligence and only acted on instinct? Luo Nan was baffled. The human-faced arachnid had always been obedient ever since it was bound by the heavily chained crow. It didn't do anything out of line with Roy 1 before. Why did it suddenly go out of control? He needed to think carefully about the problems within. At this time, Jack took the high-speed elevator and walked through the special tunnel. He had already arrived at the combat arena, but he did not directly show himself. Instead, he entered the VIP box and met with the contact person. He did not say anything useful for a while. Luo Nan concentrated his energy to consider the problem of the human-faced arachnid. Communicating with the human-faced arachnid that had no intelligence to speak of was a very strenuous matter. It wouldn't tell Luo Nan what it was thinking. Luo Nan could only rely on himself to search for the problematic link within the chaotic information. According to the flexible e-ink screen, his current analysis of the human-faced arachnid was 2%. In other words, 98% of the messages were garbled. Trying to find something comprehensible and useful from this garbled code was really, what is this? Luo Nan's soul body faintly rippled. He was shocked by the dynamic image that was suddenly reflected before his eyes. The image should be the external information that the human-faced arachnid had absorbed before, so it was straightforward and clear. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment before he quickly recognized that this was a complete diagram of the human body structure. There were even mechanical components mixed within. As for the specimen, it was undoubtedly Jack. Luo Nan used the human-faced arachnid to pry into the mysteries of Jack's body. Luo Nan's main focus was placed on the activity of Jack's brain. He only skimmed over the other aspects. But Luo Nan never expected that the human-faced arachnid would actually record the entire scene of Jack's body. Moreover, the human-faced arachnid used a form that Luo Nan was unable to understand to make an integration. What appeared in front of Luo Nan right now was a scene that seemed like a scene from a movie. As for the time period it appeared, it was right before Jack ignited the format of fire, right before the human-faced arachnid was completely blasted out. So Luo Nan saw that the dynamo core had split into a myriad of fine filaments. They pierced through the blood vessels and nerves, spreading throughout Jack's entire body. They instantly opened up a complex yet complete structure. The energy that came from every part of Jack's body, whether it was physical or mechanical, was integrated and transformed under this structure. At that moment, Jack seemed to have transformed into a precise piece of equipment controlled by a super chip. His position, time, and output were all perfectly coordinated. Because of this, the highly concentrated internal pressure didn't destroy his body at the first moment. Instead, he stepped on the dangerous boundary and successfully transported the densely woven electric fire back to the area where the nucleus and the dynamo core were located. The dynamo core lit up under the high-energy convergence. The originally flickering electric light on the spiritual plane became bright and dazzling. It was precisely during this process that the energy within Jack's body completed an inconceivable qualitative transformation. In other words, it crossed a dimension from the plane of reality and touched upon the spiritual realm. Ignition successful. Nice. Luo Nan's soul body suddenly spun in a circle to calm his excited emotions. He didn't know how this ignition method was different from that of a normal burner, but this was the first time he had seen the entire ignition process of the format of fire. Even if the true core steps weren't revealed. The crucial step of energy transformation should be completed within the dynamo core. But it didn't matter. This concept and train of thought was already priceless. Whether it was Quantum Corporation or some even larger power, their research train of thought on the burner line was the same as opening it up to Luo Nan. Luo Nan thought about how Quantum Corporation had spent over a decade to suddenly obtain a project worth $1 trillion in investment. He felt a deep pleasure of revenge. The problem was, this wasn't the end. Unexpectedly, this scene, which had been highly integrated by the human-faced arachnid, continued to be edited. The scene that appeared next was much more blurry, and the time node rewound to the moment when the dynamo core split into a myriad of fine filaments to support the structure. The image of Jack's body turned illusory. Large areas of his body were erased. All that was left was a frame constructed from the dynamo core, blood vessels, nerves, and a portion of the body's tissues. The energy passed through this frame, converged, and ignited. Luo Nan could see that this was a replay of the ignition process from before. The replay highlighted the importance of the structure itself. It erased the irrelevant branches and pushed the marvels of ignition forward once more. This also made Luo Nan think of the self-formatting. Wasn't his current body structure similar in nature? An exquisite reference. Perhaps he could refer to this model and his cultivation in the future. Luo Nan's sighs of emotion had just appeared when the continuous advancement of the scene cut carried out a second replay. It was still starting from the beginning, but this time, the complex structure supported by the dynamo core became a blurry background. There were only simple lines, straight or arcs, connecting the key nodes of the structure. Or perhaps they were simply born out of thin air. Perhaps they were magnetic lines? Luo Nan had to admit that he was completely unable to understand it. But, when the straight lines and arcs were pieced together, they formed a complete and sealed figure in the center. When it finally appeared before his eyes, a certain trembling feeling rose from the bottom of Luo Nan's heart. It dominated his everything. It was a kind of throbbing that penetrated the darkness and illuminated the splendor. A regular tetrahedron might not necessarily be that straight. An inscribed ball wasn't completely tangent to all four sides. An outbounding ball wasn't perfectly connected to all four ends. But this structure, this silhouette, and the marvelous concept that emerged from it were like a heavy fist that smashed into Luo Nan's heart. His chaotic state of mind was smashed into a chaotic mess. All that was left was the figure that had long since assimilated with his mind, the figure that was completely branded into the depths of his soul. A regular tetrahedron and an inscribed and circumscribed sphere. The human-faced arachnid's analytical figure and Luo Nan's visualization figure miraculously intertwined and connected at this moment. The throbbing that only belonged to the adherent of formatting theory completely exploded. Luo Nan froze on the spot. He forgot to restrain the human-faced arachnid. The arachnid obtained its freedom and displayed its simple-minded nature. It let out another sharp hiss and pounced towards Roy 1 on the fighting stage. Luo Nan reacted halfway, but he didn't stop the arachnid. This was because the scene of his clairvoyance was completely different at this moment. The human-faced arachnid didn't want to treat Roy 1 as food. Its pounce was more like a connection. It pushed close to Roy 1's body and stirred up turbid clouds of fire, nearly submerging Roy 1 completely. The sparkling and translucent spiritual seed was like a star that pierced through the layer of clouds. It emitted a resplendent brilliance. Roy 1 and the human-faced arachnid shook at the same time. The arachnid began to circle around Roy 1. Roy 1's gaze followed half a circle. She slowly closed her eyes when she was about to turn around. However, no matter how many negative emotions were entwined in the clouds, the ice-cold edge would always be able to cut them down, not staining them in the slightest. During this process, the edge of the stellar sword was also being tempered, becoming sharper and sharper. After dozens and hundreds of attacks, a large amount of turbid emotions did not even have the chance to pounce on it before they were turned into nothingness under the shining sharp light. But no matter how many he destroyed, the burning sea of clouds continued to advance. The sea of clouds roared and cursed. The excited spectators provided all of this. This group of pigs and sheep that had their blood drawn and their blades drawn were completely unaware that the sealed arena had already become a giant altar. Their vitality was the blood that flowed recklessly on the altar. It was the only paint that painted the burning sea of clouds. Finally, the human-faced arachnid let out a sharp hiss. It took the initiative to launch a substantial attack, throwing itself at Roy 1. However, Roy 1's stellar sword edge had been tempered to a new level after experiencing the impact of the thousands of turbid clouds of fire. The human-faced arachnid had yet to truly approach. It just received the light of the edge and countless fine wounds had already been sliced open on its malevolent demonic body. This was not an act. It was true damage. Luo Nan could feel the pain of the human-faced arachnid, but the deepest part of its reaction transmitted a joyful message. Joyful? The human-faced arachnid continued to advance, truly intersecting with the stellar sword edge. In an instant, one of its limbs was even sliced off. It fell into the burning sea of clouds and ignited with a rumble. The human-faced arachnid let out a long hiss of pain, but it turned around and threw itself over. It swallowed its own burning limb in a single gulp, trembling with excitement. Its aura weakened during this process, but it clearly congealed quite a bit. Correspondingly, its foundation structure was shaky and its situation improved somewhat. So it was like this. Luo Nan finally understood. The corresponding information was completely analyzed at this moment and flowed through his mind. There was no doubt that the human-faced arachnid was using Rui Wen. It discovered Rui Wen's ability, but it was intimidated by Luo Nan's command. It couldn't directly devour her, so it used a roundabout method in an attempt to use this ability to obtain benefits. The human-faced arachnid wanted to reach a dynamic equilibrium with Rui Wen. It had been attacking and oppressing all this time, but it controlled the intensity of the fire. It tempered Rui Wen's stellar sword edge to become even sharper, all for the sake of allowing Rui Wen to truly threaten it. This sounded very strange, but the truth was that the human-faced arachnid was incapable of achieving self-growth. It needed to devour foreign objects, including its own kind, in order to achieve individual evolution. The current situation was just a variant of devouring. The human-faced arachnid borrowed Rui Wen's stellar sword edge to chop off its shaky parts and reconstruct its foundation. As long as it wasn't truly fatal, it would gladly endure the pain even if it was riddled with 1,000 holes and its limbs flew in all directions. As for the vitality it consumed, it was naturally provided by the idiotic pigs and goats in the surroundings. The only ones that were completely damaged here were these people. This form was brimming with a sense of malevolence and bitterness. It was incomparably compatible with the human-faced arachnid's usual image. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, this special environment that it had created with its own hands was a whetstone, a furnace, and an altar. It had placed itself on the altar. Rui Wen was the one who received the greatest benefits from this. Luo Nan still didn't know what ability Rui Wen had awakened to in the end. But he knew that the human-faced arachnid had an astonishing potential when he saw its miserable appearance. But in order to stimulate this potential, one must not be disturbed by external objects. One must have a clear and penetrating mental state. Only then could one withstand the turbid flow and remain untainted by even a speck of dust despite being scoured 100 times or 1,000 times. Therefore, Rui Wen was also on the altar. The human-faced arachnid was using her, and vice versa. The two used each other and polished each other to push their own level all the way to higher levels. Even now, they still couldn't see the upper limit. Such a scene might not be completely real, but it was a part that Luo Nan could understand and extrapolate. The overall composition of the scene was faintly connected to the visualization diagram he was most accustomed to. Rui Wen and the human-faced arachnid occupied the most core positions. They could be said to be inscribed spheres, representing a kind of endlessly circulating internal power. The fighting arena was the boundary of the sealed diagram. It was the external sphere, representing the external environment and energy supply. As for the tetrahedron, wasn't that Luo Nan? The human-faced arachnid was within Luo Nan's system. All of its actions were essentially variations and extensions of the system. So in the end, the one who provided this framework was Luo Nan himself. This realization rose in Luo Nan's mind, and he suddenly understood where the consumption of observation had gone. That was the price and challenge that must be paid as a carrier. He wasn't standing on the altar, but he was the altar. Whether or not Luo Nan's format pyramid could accommodate the endlessly rising levels of both sides, whether or not it could bear the conflicting power of both sides, whether or not it could provide sufficient support, was the key to the success or failure of this sacrificial ritual. Once the framework collapsed, the balance would be lost. Either Rui Wen would kill the human-faced arachnid, or the human-faced arachnid would destroy Rui Wen. There was no third possibility. Even if Rui Wen died, it didn't mean that the human-faced arachnid had gone against Luo Nan's will. This was because the entire framework had failed. Of course, Luo Nan would certainly suffer the backlash of the framework's collapse at that time. He didn't know what would happen when that time came. Human-faced arachnid. Luo Nan gnashed his teeth. Right at this moment, a spotlight suddenly shone down from above the fighting stage, illuminating the edge of the area. The live DJ played the whistling sound of an airplane skimming through the air at a low altitude. A long wait, a bloody future. The Beast King battle that everyone is looking forward to. Our other protagonist has arrived. The ending sound was a moaning sigh. It was a pretentious posture, but it gently plucked a chord in the hearts of all the spectators. The whistling sound that followed caused the entire fighting arena to shake. Chapter 122. Where the spotlights shone, the ground first sank, then rose up again, and a huge metal box appeared above it. Before it had completely entered the range of the spotlights, they could hear the sound of friction and collision. It was very strange. The metal box was the size of a small container. Its length was close to 6 meters, and its height and width were also more than 2 meters. Compared to the standard boxing ring, its length was very close. When this metal box appeared in front of everyone, the fighting arena was first stifled, and then the shouts from the stands turned into boos and laughter. F***ck, big guy. This physique, is it a brown bear? A Siberian tiger? A black caiman? Shameless enough, vicious enough. Continue to raise the stakes. Can we change the bet? Clearly, the fighting arena's actions had caused some controversy, but most people were still happy to see it happen. They didn't care about the outcome of the bet, they just wanted to see that bloody scene. Of course, it would be better if there was a bit of suspense. A one-sided situation ultimately made people feel that something was missing. At this time, the front of the metal box opened, but nothing came out. Instead, there was a loud ong-ong sound, as well as the sound of an excited collision. The force was not small, but the sound, just as the group of people looked at each other, the entire metal box opened, revealing the situation inside. The audience was stunned. Inside the metal box, there were actually 2 cages, about the same size. One was a dark, translucent glass box, and it was impossible to see what was inside. The other was an ordinary-looking iron cage. The fellow running around inside had a long face and tusks, a thick body, thick skin, and iron bones. It was indeed a huge creature, and its strength was not small either, knocking against the iron cage with clanging sounds. This was a wild boar. Alright, from a practical point of view, if 99% of the people in the fighting arena were thrown down and made to face this beast that weighed more than a few hundred kilograms, there would only be death. But, the style was not right. What they wanted to see was a charaba with flesh and blood flying everywhere, not a farce of people chasing each other and bumping into each other. Besides, was any wild boar worthy of making them wait for more than 10 minutes? Boos rang out. It didn't matter which company's boss or which department's official they were during the day. At this moment, all the spectators and gamblers on the stands had completely thrown away their reservations and vented their emotions to their heart's content. Whoever they didn't like, they would boo and scold. Amidst the deafening boos, the DJ did not dare to make a sound. On the boxing stage, Roiwen still stood quietly with her eyes closed. Below the boxing ring, the front of the black glass box next to the iron cage silently opened. The box was still pitch black and didn't reveal anything. However, the wild boar that had been restless in the iron cage on the other side suddenly screeched, as if someone had stabbed a butcher's knife into its stomach. The boos in the arena were forcibly cut off by this ear-piercing cry, and then the crowd of spectators saw the wild boar in the cage desperately trying to get out. The collision was so fierce that it actually caused the entire iron cage to shift. The 2 parallel boxes were forcibly pulled apart by almost 3 meters until they crashed into the boxing ring. They continued to exert force, causing the boxing ring to rumble. What the hell? Luo Nan was a bit annoyed and a bit anxious. The sacrificial ritual had reached a critical moment. Countless lines appeared within the burning sea of clouds, building an even more exquisite structure. It was created by the human-faced arachnid's valiant instincts. Profound and unfathomable laws and principles were contained within. Luo Nan didn't try to analyze it. The human-faced arachnid surpassed him in terms of level. There was no meaning in forcefully deciphering it. The only thing he could do right now was to maintain the framework of the sacrificial altar, to make it maintain stability. He was doing quite well right now, and the two people on the sacrificial altar were doing quite well as well. The play of tricks in the fighting arena just now had caused the supply of turbid emotions to be a bit scattered. That wasn't a big deal. Blindly using a fierce fire might not be able to cook rice. The slower the fire, the better the cooking would be. This bunch of idiots, pigs, and sheep. They were simply hammering nails into their own coffins. But at this time, the wild boar crazily rammed into the boxing ring, and the interference from the outside world suddenly increased. The human-faced arachnid wasn't a big deal, but Luo Nan was really worried that Roy Wen would get distracted. While Luo Nan was worried, the crowd of spectators were in high spirits. Oh. What a trick. Deliberately setting up suspense and suppressing one's desires had been used many times. This was what the spectators loved the most. Their minds were firmly hooked, and the sounds of booing and cursing completely disappeared. The fighting arena actually became quite a bit quieter. Something finally came out from the black glass box at this time. A long forked tongue stuck to the ground. It flickered in and out, and trillions of sensory cells replaced the functions of eyes and nose on its rough surface to detect the outside environment. Snake or lizard? Hurry up and start. Hurry up and show your head. It seemed to feel the restless emotions of the outside world. The thing in the glass box finally stuck its long and narrow head out. It looked to be of the lizard type. But the spectators felt that something was wrong halfway through. This head was nearly 2 meters long, right? Its head was mainly occupied by a long, narrow, and deep gaping mouth. Its front end was practically reaching the iron cage beneath the boxing ring. The pitiful wild boar was about to bring the cage and jump onto the stage. The length of the body was calculated from the length of the head. How could the glass box hold it? In reality, the flexible body that seemed to be swimming in the air extended out a full 4 meters in length. There was still a tail that hadn't come out yet. The mouth occupied half the length of the body that was revealed. This made its external appearance look closer to that of a crocodile, but it was much taller. Its 4 limbs were extremely thick and solid, supporting its belly far off the ground. Its forked tongue still hung down, sticking to the ground as it flicked in and out. It looked strange and cautious. What was this thing? Just as Luo Nan was puzzled, Crag Burst let out a low roar, CTMB. Before the coarse curses could fall, the monster's 2-meter-long mouth opened wide without any warning. Thousands of dense, cold, and sharp teeth lined up in 4 rows. The camera faithfully recorded the scene, and a close-up shot was made through the broadcast screen. The scene was clearly displayed before everyone's eyes. The entire arena sucked in a breath of cold air. Protruding forward, biting, closing, swallowing. The monster performed a series of concise movements like this, and a glaring bloody light sprayed out in front of it. The wild boar that weighed several hundred kilograms, including the solid iron cage that surrounded it, was suddenly cut in half. It was swallowed by the monster in one gulp. Screams rang out from all directions. A rare situation of half being quiet and half being hysterical appeared in the entire fighting arena. And at this time, the enormous broadcast screen above the fighting arena was retracted, causing the area above the fighting arena to be even more spacious. Then a maglev-type floating platform descended from the opening in the upper level of the fighting arena. There were no handrails, nor were there any fences. Jack stood steadily atop the platform. He wore a white shirt, black trousers, and a black bow tie. He was the standard attire of a referee, but he looked down from above. His face was expressionless, and he turned a blind eye to the strange situation in the fighting arena. He raised his hands slightly and separated them to 2 sides. One side represented Roy Wen, who was standing silently. The other side represented the brutal monster that was swallowing its food. He spoke with a calm and emotionless tone, Marauder, Roy Wen. Mutant, Great Maw Basilisk. Beast King battle, begin. Mutant? Was it really a freaking mutant? Chapter 123. Oh. Damn it. Whose idea was this? I love him to death. Hurry up and start. Start. Don't tell me I have to wait for it to finish eating that pig and bring an iron cage. Look. Those 4 rows of sharp teeth. What would it feel like to have a slender body roll around inside? Who's going to give me a close-up? You on the stage. You on the stage. Open your eyes. Look. What a cute baby. The so-called Beast King battle didn't immediately begin, but the spectators in the fighting arena were all brimming with interest. When the fighting arena brought out the mutant as the main character of this battle, everyone knew that the course of the battle would be completely one-sided. They could only enjoy the prelude and the conclusion. Right now, Ruiwen continued to stand quietly with her eyes closed. This was already the best posture to maintain suspense. Some people were really worried that this flat-chested witch would witness the terror of the great maw basilisk with her own eyes. This fight would turn into a hunting show for the mutant early on. CTMB. CTMB. Crag burst spat out obscenities as he extended his hand to touch the transparent protective wall in front of him. Right now he had to break through this obstacle in order to rescue Ruiwen from the jaws of the mutant. Giving him 8 to 10 punches was obviously not a problem, but this required a process. If by any chance the great maw basilisk's vicious nature was aroused, then even 10,000 deaths wouldn't be enough to redeem himself. Crag Burst was regretting right now. Why didn't he put a stop to this damned road of adjudication earlier? Why did such a dangerous situation occur? Crag Burst quickly calculated a few times and confirmed that he needed at least 5 to 7 punches in order to blast open the protective wall. And this was under the premise that the fighting arena's defensive power didn't interfere. The uncertainty was too high. He needed to obtain support, Scout. I need a bit of time. Crag Burst had just spoken when a small map that was clearly drawn at the last minute was sent over from the Psychic Wave Network. It clearly drew a route from his current location to a certain area in the upper levels. Luo Nan's voice transmitted over, "Don't force your way in. Enter from the VIP room. That's where Jack just came from. It's the only shortcut. You still have time. This damned lizard will finish digesting its food. The great maw basilisk only needs 2 minutes to digest its food. Then 2 minutes it is. If it's not enough, then I'll take it." Okay. Crag Burst didn't say anything else. He turned around and left. Right now he could only choose to believe in his teammate, and Luo Nan's previous performance was worthy of his trust. Crag Burst had just walked into the lounge when Jack's gaze swept over from the skies above the fighting arena. This minute movement was undoubtedly exposed by Luo Nan's mental senses. It wasn't easy to break through. In that case, it would give up the hard and make it easy. It would first devour the simple target. This was its only choice. The great maw basilisk stared at its target on the fighting stage. Its long tongue stuck to the ground and sniffed, digging out deeper information. This slender creature actually possessed a certain level of threat. As an apex predator, this was a situation that it absolutely couldn't allow. The great maw basilisk's underdeveloped vocal cords didn't have the ability to raise its voice and roar. But the low growling sound it produced was enough. When the low and deep sound wave spread through the loudspeaker and spread throughout the entire arena, the close-up shots of its icy cold pupils were transmitted to every broadcast screen. The spectators' hearts palpitated for a moment before they excitedly stood up one after another. They raised their arms and shouted, "Adjudicate! Adjudicate! Adjudicate!" The atmosphere in the arena was about to explode. Not for anything else, but for the special term mutant. In the 30 years after the Third World War, mutants had always occupied the top position of the Earth's food chain. They had firmly trampled the original overlords, humans beneath their feet. The wilderness, the oceans, and even parts of the air had all become their domain. The entire world's population exceeded 10 billion, and they were squeezed into 88 large metropolitan areas. For a time, they were in imminent danger. Even if the present humans developed the deep blue walkers, changed their tactics, and continuously obtained battle results, they still wouldn't dare to say that they had completely entered the strategic counteroffensive phase. Recovering lost territory could only be called a distant goal. This was the spiritual memory that mutants gave to the people of the present generation, especially the generation after the war. At this very moment, the bloody scene in the center of the fighting arena caused the spectators to feel fear. But the layout of the fighting arena and its powerful defenses gave them positive hints. They were the true masters of the fighting arena. They were the powerful ones who enjoyed everything. The stimulation brought about by this unique position of dominance was something that no other ferocious beast could ever hope to achieve. This illusory power and dominant position caused the flames in the spectators' hearts to burst forth in an even more intense manner. The people in the back row stood up, and the spectators in the front row crowded forward. They squeezed against the transparent protective wall, striving to get a closer look at the great maw basilisk's savage appearance. Luo Nan coldly swept his gaze over this chaotic scene. Even though these spectators were the largest source of noise, they were the most insignificant group within the structure of the altar. Who would pay attention to pigs and sheep that were about to run out of blood? But a subtle change appeared at this very moment. Everyone stood up and shouted crazily. There were some people who weren't able to truly stand up. Chapter 124. No one discovered the abnormality here. Everyone's gazes were focused on the fighting stage, appreciating the fight that was destined to end quickly. The first one. Luo Nan's energy could no longer be divided at this time. He didn't have the strength nor the need to lament over the fading of life. He only sensed that a certain marvelous element was born within the altar as this person's flame of life burned out. The element content was too minute. He couldn't see any obvious changes. But with the first one, there was a second, a third, and many more. The relevant numbers within the range of his mental senses increased without end. The accumulation of the marvelous element didn't increase. It was like the ratio of a certain pigment. It changed from light to intense. This was the color of death. The blood would eventually run dry. The blood was cut open at the same time. Then the corresponding death of exhaustion would arrive at about the same time. The one who collapsed right now was just the first wave. Luo Nan had never thought of killing anyone, just like how he didn't think of saving anyone at this moment. He needed to focus on the framework of the altar. He needed to focus on the subtle changes brought about by the infiltration of the new element. The death of each individual was a challenge to the supply of the burning cloud of fire. However, looking at the overall structure, the addition of the death paint formed a complementary situation where one side was weakened while the other side was strengthened. The latter couldn't provide energy, but it built a new structure within the framework. It was like a bridge, leading the sacrificer to a plane that had never been reached before. From the frenzy of life to the deep silence of death. Whether it was the human-faced arachnid, Roy 1, or even Luo Nan, they all touched upon this straightforward and deep domain. Luo Nan was a bit spellbound. The pressure of information that was about to clog suddenly erased a bit within this deep silence of death. A lot of information had value on the plane of life, but it was meaningless once it entered the domain of death. The blending of life and death was like a filter. It filtered out many things. This could be considered a type of comprehension, but it was only at a very shallow level. Especially when compared to Roy 1, when the domain of death opened up to them, Luo Nan discovered that Roy 1 possessed an inconceivable keenness towards this domain. Her keenness far surpassed Luo Nan's and the human-faced arachnid's degree. Every drop of life was able to bring her new harvests. Luo Nan vaguely felt as if Roy 1 had come to his side. She stood side by side with him as she watched the flames of life extinguish, disintegrate, and evolve on all four sides of the stands. She obtained information that he was unable to comprehend from within. But from another perspective, Luo Nan was originally unable to discover this information. But because of Rui Wen's existence, he was able to come into contact with this information in advance. He didn't know what use this had, but one thing was clear: Rui Wen had discovered and utilized the power of death. This was something that the human-faced arachnid was incapable of doing. Because of this, the balance at the center of the altar was suddenly broken. Rui Wen and the human-faced arachnid continued to increase in rank. However, the current situation was that Rui Wen would advance 2 ranks for every rank the human-faced arachnid advanced. In just a few breaths of time, the internal force that sharpened and pushed each other forward was on the verge of collapse. The rules of the sacrificial ceremony were: whoever became the weaker would become the sacrificial offering. The human-faced arachnid let out an ear-piercing screech. This was the situation it had created. It had placed itself on the altar, but in the end, it had become a sacrifice. But its survival instincts drove it to struggle. Even if it was destined to perish, it didn't want to be the first. Luo Nan watched this scene. He watched the burning cloud of fire grow more and more clamorous. He watched the spectators in the fighting arena shout like a tsunami. He also watched the sharp edge of the starry sky illuminate the gloom, and he watched the spider demon struggle in its death throes. Inexplicably, he didn't have any fluctuations of emotion. It was as if he was watching a pantomime that had nothing to do with him. Or perhaps it was just a formula that was arranged and calculated on the surface of a paper. It wasn't that he had lost the ability to feel emotions. Rather, he simply didn't have the luxury to display his emotions. Maintaining the framework of the altar had already overdrawn all of his energy. Cragburst's transmission came at this time: "Scout. I've arrived at the VIP room. Holy crap. It's a giant lizard." The great maw basilisk began to move. It slowly turned to an angle and determined the optimal path to hunt. According to its habits, it was about to launch an attack immediately. Cragburst just so happened to rush into the VIP room. He knocked out the contact, who was about to scream in shock. He saw everything that was happening in the arena from that angle, and he gave a loud warning. "Speed up. Don't get distracted." Luo Nan's message was calm and peaceful to the extreme. Cragburst was clearly stifled, but he still listened to Luo Nan's words. He crashed into the secret passageway of the VIP room and made a mad dash towards Jack's location. Luo Nan didn't pay special attention to the great maw basilisk's movements. This was because his mind was unable to bear the heavy burden at this moment. It had already automatically adjusted itself to be divided into 2 parts, within the framework and outside the framework. The former was primary. The latter was secondary. The priority was undoubtedly to resolve the situation within the framework. As for outside the framework, then he would resolve it within the framework. This was truly a marvelous dichotomy. Luo Nan's thoughts stirred, and the heavily chained crow hummed with a trembling hum. It crossed the air and headed straight for the great maw basilisk. Luo Nan didn't know if he could control this mutant. His goal wasn't set that high. All he did was use his own unique method to pull what was outside the framework into the framework. As for entering the framework, who knew if he would become a priest or a sacrificial offering? The great maw basilisk moved. The surrounding spectators screamed themselves hoarse. Its 4 thick and solid limbs moved quickly, and it easily stepped onto the meter-tall fighting stage. Its enormous body swam through the air, and its enormous mouth, which could bite through steel, split open as it charged towards Rui Wen. Luo Nan watched all of this coldly. The heavily chained crow had already pierced through the great maw basilisk's head. The marvelous connection was completed. From his perspective, the great maw basilisk wasn't pouncing towards Rui Wen. It was pouncing towards the framework of his altar. It wasn't a collision. It was just a leap. The plane of reality, the mental plane, and the rendering of emotions. Everything interweaved into one place. His altar's framework was truly connected to every plane, towering majestically. Rui Wen still didn't open her eyes, but she clearly sensed it. She staggered her feet and dodged to the limit in this crucial moment. She dodged to the front of the great maw basilisk's charge. Anyone would dodge when faced with the charge of a high-speed truck. The spectators weren't disappointed. It's good that she dodged. It's exciting when there's a back and forth. The cheers from the spectators were like a landslide and a tsunami. But amidst this roar, a weak hissing sound inexplicably penetrated into everyone's ears. The great maw basilisk and Rui Wen's body staggered. Its enormous body was nearly the same length as the fighting stage. Perhaps it had charged too quickly, but it lost some control. It was unable to stop itself after landing on the ground. It directly leaped over the fighting stage. It actually stumbled as it charged straight towards the spectators behind it. They watched the terrifying mutant charge towards them. They clearly knew that it was impossible for the great maw basilisk to crash into the protective wall, but the spectators closer to the fighting stage, especially the beauties who were responsible for creating the atmosphere, still screamed in a half-real, half-fake manner. But halfway there, the screams became hysterical. The body of the enormous beast, which was over 5 meters long and weighed over 800 kilograms, was black and heavy like steel. Everyone could see it wither at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. It suddenly shrunk by a size. The bones that supported its body also lost their hardness. Chapter 125. In the face of sudden stimulation that exceeded the limits of endurance, screaming was perhaps the only way for people to breathe before they suffocated. The exclamations and screams formed a chaotic hurricane that swept through the entire arena. There were more than 5 spectators on the viewing platform directly opposite the great maw basilisk. They couldn't withstand this wave of impact, and their eyes rolled back as they fell to the ground. At this time, the phenomenon of collapsing was no longer an exception. More and more people noticed it, and more people were infected. The arena was equipped with medical personnel, but the incessant cries for help made the limited medical personnel at a loss as to what to do. And when these fragments of information were gathered together, a clear scale was revealed, and a bone-piercing chill descended upon the arena. A shiver ran through everyone. Luo Nan calmly looked down at all of this. In his eyes, death covered life. More and more information lost its meaning, and the framework structure of the altar grew clearer and clearer because of this. To put it bluntly, when the great maw basilisk was led into the altar's frame, regardless of whether it was inside or outside the frame, the entire situation suddenly became clear. Under the framework of the altar, the great maw basilisk's killing intent directly constituted a challenge to Rui Wen. On the material plane, the great maw basilisk's fleshly body was very powerful. It was completely at the level of a running heavy truck. Moreover, it possessed extraordinary flexibility and destructive power. However, on the mental plane, this fellow could only be considered to be at the level of an intelligent beast. On the current level of the altar, there was an insurmountable distance between him and Rui Wen and the human-faced arachnid. Then, as a matter of course, the great maw basilisk was reduced to a target for slaughter. It was also an excellent scapegoat. The human-faced arachnid's struggles were effective. At the juncture of life and death, it practically slaughtered its way into the great maw basilisk's body along with Rui Wen's star edge. The abundant life force of blood, qi, and blood became the best shield and substitute for the human-faced arachnid. The strong pressure that had been accumulating all this time, the iron rules of the sacrificial offerings that were almost certain to die, were all pushed in together and carried by the great maw basilisk. At this moment, the great maw basilisk was the converging point of all the backlash energy. The human-faced arachnid was able to preserve its little life. Even though it had suffered a crushing defeat in the end and had been chopped down a level, it had still made great progress with the addition and subtraction. The only worry was that he was extremely weak and couldn't maintain his demonic body anymore, so he turned back into a demonic symbol to recuperate. The rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. Without a doubt, Rui Wen was the one who benefited the most from the entire sacrificial ceremony. The instant the great maw basilisk stepped onto the altar, Rui Wen's star radiated the most resplendent rays of light. Destroying one's soul and destroying one's physical body were two completely different levels. There was no difference between them. However, in order to destroy both the soul and the physical body at the same time, the only way was to simultaneously interfere with both the physical and mental domains and break through the invisible barrier between the two. Rui Wen had done it. At this time, she slowly opened her eyes. Her pupils were still serene and silent, but she only stood there. Her even breathing carried a clanging sound. As for the mental plane, the turbulent burning clouds formed pieces of emptiness. But on the other hand, those empty silhouettes were like death gods that had stepped out of the void and raised their scythes high. As the sole victor on the sacrificial altar, Rui Wen's star dominated everything. Wherever the radiance of the stars shone, she only needed a thought to squeeze out every last bit of value from the sacrificial pigs and sheep within the framework, turning them into deathly stillness. At present, the only obstacle was probably the speed at which Rui Wen was able to comprehend the information within. Luo Nan was probably the only person who could stop Rui Wen. As long as he was determined to dismantle this framework. But the corresponding backlash and the price he would have to pay made it so that he didn't have such thoughts at all. What he was doing right now was to observe the subsequent developments and changes. Unfortunately, the sealed ceiling above the fighting arena exploded open with a rumble a few seconds later. Wood shards, glass shards, and even steel fragments filled the sky. This caused quite a few spectators, who had already sunk into a fragile state of mind, to immediately pass over. Cragburst had rushed over. But at this moment, the sound of his chin hitting the ground was even clearer than the momentum he created. My God, her ability has awakened. It's at least B rank or higher. Cragburst was clearly distracted because of Rui Wen's awakening. He even forgot about the most dangerous person below him. Luo Nan never gave up on monitoring Jack. He immediately gave a warning, stop him. Jack merely shot a glance at the sky from the maglev referee stage. Then his figure tilted and he suddenly flew down. His target was none other than Rui Wen on the fighting stage. On the fighting stage, Rui Wen also aimed her gaze at Jack. The third battle of the Road of Adjudication? No, that senseless gimmick had already ended. There weren't enough people in the entire fighting arena who could endure that atmosphere. Jack understood this point very well, so he didn't make any gaudy displays. He directly activated the deep CEM field that gave Luo Nan an incomparable headache. Reality proved that the deep CEM field's effect on the material plane was quite considerable. The fighting stage, which had just been heavily stomped by the Great Maw Basilisk, couldn't bear it any longer. The central region warped and collapsed. Then the entire ground caved in. The collapse of the fighting stage and the effect of the deep CEM field affected Rui Wen's balance. She used a set of small steps to adjust herself, dodging the frontal assault of Jack in passing. Stepping barefoot on the rubble of the fighting stage didn't seem to affect her too much. But then a muffled explosion rang out. The floor beneath the fighting stage exploded with a bang, sending fragments flying everywhere. Aside from Jack, this exceeded everyone's expectations. Even Luo Nan, who possessed all-encompassing perception, didn't notice that there was an explosive device buried in the floor beneath the fighting arena. Why the hell was this prepared for this scene? Rui Wen's figure fell down unavoidably. If this was the Rui Wen from before the Beast King battle, she could only wait until she landed before making adjustments. But the current Rui Wen was already completely different. She raised her hand during the process of falling. There seemed to be no signs of exerting force at all, but a hissing sound rang out amidst the chaotic scattering of fragments in the air. All the gravel and wood along the way were sliced in half, and an extremely sharp stream of air headed straight for the diving Jack. Jack reacted quickly. He raised his right arm and heard a muffled sound. The sleeve of his shirt was torn apart. His skin split open and blood spurted out, but there was no blood at all. A metallic luster flashed beneath the layer of flesh. Jack's right arm was a part of his body's transformation. The outside was wrapped in a layer of artificial flesh, and the inside was made of an extremely hard alloy. Right now, the layer of artificial flesh could be seen corroding and withering at a visible speed. The color of the alloy underneath was a bit dim. Highly corrosive? No, it's an even purer power. The glow of Jack's bionic eyes grew stronger as he stared fixedly at Rui Wen's face. A recording device buried deep within his body was recording and transmitting key information. Chapter 126. The area below the fighting stage was a sealed elevator platform. Even further below was the cargo passageway. The Great Maw Basilisk had been transported here through this passageway before being lifted into the fighting arena. The elevator platform had already started moving at this time. It moved down at a very fast speed. Rui Wen landed steadily on the ground. Her slender yet sturdy body immediately exerted strength to launch an attack against Jack, who hadn't yet stabilized his footing. She was more confident than ever that she could kill this callous adjudicator head-on. But then a short beep rang out from an unknown place. Rui Wen's eyes suddenly widened as a powerful electric current exploded from a certain location within her chest. It instantly bombarded her internal organs and spread to her 4 limbs and head. The electric current passed through her nervous system and stimulated her muscles, instantly sending Rui Wen into a rigid state. Her body instantly lost balance and she fell straight toward Jack. "Baby, let's go home." Jack didn't feel the slightest bit surprised. He extended his hand and scooped Rui Wen up. But soon his brows furrowed as a sharp chill pierced into his skin. Even his internal organs felt a bit cold. Rui Wen's awakened ability still existed even though she had suffered an unexpected heavy injury. The skin and flesh below Jack's ribs shriveled and fell off in an instant, revealing half of his sternum constructed from alloy plates. Jack only furrowed his brows in response to this. Another pulse exploded from the depths of Rui Wen's brain in the next moment. This time, it truly erased all of her ability to counterattack and erased her consciousness. Holy crap! Crag burst was only a second late, but he could only watch helplessly as Rui Wen fell into the enemy's hands. He struck out with a fist under his great fury. The sealed elevator platform rumbled and the surface of the platform shook. How could he have known that Jack's face was expressionless? He grabbed the unconscious Rui Wen's legs and swept her over, startling Crag burst into a rush of strength. The upper portion of the cargo passageway was already exposed on one side of the elevator platform. Jack didn't wait for Rui Wen to land. He already grabbed Rui Wen and jumped down. Crag burst didn't even think as he chased after them. But just as he entered the passageway, he saw Jack raise his handgun. Jack pulled the trigger and a rumble exploded within the half-sealed passageway. Unexpectedly, this was a sonic bomb. Crag burst let out a muffled groan as the strengthened sound waves shook his brain. His feet were in a mess, and signs of a concussion had already appeared. Jack wasn't troubled by this. The special structure of his brain allowed him to quickly adjust. But he didn't linger and just ran wildly through the passageway while holding Rui Wen. Luonan asked, "Are you okay?" Crag burst didn't utter a word. He crawled up and chased after him. At first, it was a little shaky, but then it returned to normal. The freight channel could carry containers, so it was very spacious. Usually, it also carried some shady goods. At the end of the passageway, there were garages on both sides. A group of gangsters in the passageway were oblivious to what had happened in the combat arena. They were gathered together, laughing and playing a large-scale AR game. The female protagonist in the game was almost broken by them. The tunnel was filled with moans and yells. Some people felt that this was not enough and began to call the real person. However, this freight channel was still relatively remote, so the other party needed to send out a car to pick it up. The caller could only get up while cursing. He was ready to pick a car from the garage and return quickly. However, before he could even stand up straight, the metal doors of the 6 garages on both sides of the passageway opened at the same time. Identity checks, passwords, and other safety measures were all skipped. The lights of the 4-wheeled heavy trucks in the garage lit up one after another. The glaring krypton gas lamps illuminated the group of people in the middle of the passageway in a daze. They were immediately blinded. Then the rumbling sounds of the vehicle starting up rang out. The group of semi-blind people were all qualified old drivers. They were scared out of their wits when they heard the change in the sound of the engines. The AI is out of control. Run. It was unknown who shouted, but they didn't care about the consequences. They turned around and ran. They had no choice but to run. They were right in the middle of the passageway when the 4 heavy trucks drove out. A single mishap and they would be crushed to death. The unmanned heavy trucks started up practically at the same time. Some were fast, and some were slow. They utilized the space in the passageway to the greatest limit. They used the most efficient method to drive out of the garage in the shortest amount of time. They lined up in 2 rows and sped out. They didn't care about any obstacles they encountered during this process. The group of people ran towards the back of the passageway. Aside from 2 unlucky fellows who were scraped by the corners of the vehicles, they were more scared than hurt. But the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard at this time. Their dusky and blurred vision gradually became clear. They saw a person who shouldn't have appeared here, Jack. Mr. Jack. Jack ignored their existence. He carried a person under his ribs and ran with large strides. His speed was truly fast. He caught up to the 4 accelerating heavy trucks in the blink of an eye. He chose the one at the very front and jumped onto the roof of the truck while carrying the person. That kind of inhuman jumping ability made the group of people dumbfounded. F***ck off. Crag burst swept past like a tempest. He saw Jack's movements from afar and wanted to catch up. But when he tried to pass through the 2 heavy trucks behind him, the 2 unmanned trucks moved inwards at the same time. They wanted to squeeze him to death. Crag burst cursed loudly. He also displayed his inhuman jumping ability and jumped onto the roof of the 4-meter-tall truck. But before he could steady himself, the heavy truck under his feet came to a sudden stop. The powerful inertia threw him to the front of the truck. The other truck that had been driving side by side suddenly turned horizontally and rammed towards Crag burst. In the end, Crag burst didn't excel in agility. He was hit head-on in midair with a bang and was forcefully swept towards the side wall of the tunnel. The heavy truck chased after him and rammed. A rumble rang out as the truck smashed into the side wall of the tunnel. What the hell? Crag burst managed to roll in time and extricate himself from under the truck's wheels. The 2 heavy trucks had been turned into 2 heavy weapons by Jack. Even though they didn't deal any substantial damage to Crag burst's coarse skin and thick flesh, they seriously hindered Crag burst's pursuit. By the time Crag burst got up and started chasing, he could only see the taillights of the 2 heavy trucks ahead. Crag burst's face was ashen. He gritted his teeth and continued to run madly. But the 2 heavy trucks ahead had already driven out of the tunnel at this time. Looking at the headlights, one was driving left and one was driving right. Crag burst's scalp went numb. He didn't have the time to look at Jack's movements just now. God knows which truck Jack took Roy 1 and ran away in. Scout. Just as the call came out from the psychic wave network, the sound of flapping wings could be heard above his head. Ink, who had run off to God knows where, streaked over his head to guide the route. Luo Nan used the hex ear to transmit. It's the one on the right. It's heading out of the city. You need a means of transportation. Jack has the ability to control all information devices. You can only choose the non-intelligent model. F***ck. How can there be non-intelligent models nowadays? Bicycles? The motorcycle you drove over here is pretty good. There's one here too. Make a turn. Goods yard area. 70 meters to the right. Crag burst didn't hesitate at all. He madly sprinted all the way to the location Luo Nan spoke of and sent the 2 gangsters flying. He snatched the motorcycle and shot out like an arrow, chasing with all his might. It was said that sharpening one's axe wouldn't delay the work of cutting firewood. Gangsters loved to modify high-powered motorcycles the most. Though they were electrically powered, they could casually reach speeds of 200 kilometers per hour on good roads. Crag Burst still remembered the limitations of Luo Nan's spirit-attached crow. He growled, "Leave the rest to me." Ah. I'll **CK Jack's 8 generations of ancestors. The motorcycle rumbled as it charged out of the tunnel. It drove onto the shabby road. The taillights of the heavy truck could still be seen at this time. The head-on strong winds let out a rumble. Crag Burst used his powerful arm strength to ensure the stability of the front of the motorcycle. He directly turned the throttle to the bottom. But at this time, an omen suddenly sprouted in his mind. Luo Nan's warning cut in at the same time, above. Fuck. Luo Nan cursed in a rarely seen manner. The dark red tail of flames cut over his head and connected with the road ahead. A fiercely expanding fireball appeared before Crag Burst's eyes. The powerful shockwave and the terrifying raging flames instantly engulfed him. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.